This is your home for St. Cloud State hockey, keeping you up to date on the NCHC.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Pervix!
Women's WCHA.
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
The National Hockey League.
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill, the thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL, a game winner!
And everything from the state of hockey.
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.
Welcome to the Huskies Warming House Podcast Den. And welcome into episode number 129 here on the Huskies Warming House podcast. My name is Noah Grant alongside Nick Maxon. And Nick, we've been doing some NCHC previews, which were the brainchild of your own creation, whatever you want to call it. And this is kind of the one we've all been waiting for, at least if you're a St. Cloud State Huskies fan. Our final preview, of course, is the hometown club. And it's kind of fun to see all of these come to fruition a little bit and go through all of the teams and kind of set the precedent about what it's going to be. And then the grand finale, of course, which is going to be St. Cloud State here on this edition of the Huskies Warming House podcast. We also have quite a bit of Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup things to get through. Of course, some more signings, a lot more PTO offers coming through as well. And then some new jerseys and things that are popping around the NHL. Kind of cool to have a really late release for one of the NHL teams, and probably what has been the worst kept secret of the past week as far as the NHL fashion industry is concerned. And then you'll want to stick around if you're a Huskies fan as well. The Extra Ice Session, all things happening in St. Cloud State. What have you missed from the past summer, since we've really not gotten a chance to talk about St. Cloud in depth? We're going to talk a little bit about the new video boards, new personnel that are coming in, and a lot other things that you should be having on your radar, as we are basically less than 2 weeks away almost from some college hockey action. So should be very exciting. And as always, we start with Center Ice View News and Notes and the Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup. Center Ice View News and Notes. Center Ice View provides you with the best coverage of St. Cloud State Huskies hockey, from game notes, recaps, photos, and more. Go to centericeview.com.
Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup, Noah, and the Center Ice View News and Notes. And as you mentioned, quite a bit to get through. Speaking of a bunch of stuff to get through, holy cow, the Sharks and Evander Kane had a bunch of stuff to work through for a while now. But it sounds like they did work it through. It sounds like everything is done. As far as the actual details on what's been happening, yet to be determined. But for those who have missed it, the Sharks terminated the contract of Evander Kane. Effectively felt like there was a breach of contract from Evander Kane standpoint. He was then re-signed to the Edmonton Oilers, and from what we know, it sounds like they're not going to essentially penalize the Sharks like a terrible amount of money. But it sounds like they're just going to take the difference, or the reporting suggests, between the current Edmonton contract and the Sharks contract, extend it out over a certain period, then charge a cap hit to the Sharks based on that amount. Again, this is all not confirmed, but this was something they came to as a settlement. So this is good for everybody involved, the Sharks, the Oilers, and especially for Evander Kane. If this was something that went into the regular season, I would imagine that it'd just be a lingering distraction. So what was kind of a goofy situation seems to be over with, but again, still waiting on the exact details. From what we know, that's sort of what we're expecting to see, is some type of NHL penalty to the Sharks with some type of cap hit over the next maybe couple of seasons.
Yeah, and I think it's nice to just get it done and let everybody move on. The Sharks are doing their own thing. Evander Kane's got his own thing that he's doing. The NHL and NHLPA approved it, so everybody moved on. It's not often that you hear that the NHL and NHLPA agree on something and agree on it
quickly.
Yeah, so let's just take the money, literally and figuratively, and run with it. So
Bigger news in the Pacific Northwest, Seattle Kraken promoting Alexander Mandrecki to AGM. This is kind of cool because this is the first woman, I should say, that is holding an assistant general manager position at the NHL level. Spent the past 3 seasons as the director of hockey strategy and research. And how about this? Spent 4 seasons with our own hometown Minnesota Wild before joining the Seattle organization last season. So we talk about the continued influence of women in the game of hockey. Now Mandrecki getting a very elite position within the Seattle organization as the assistant general manager position, Noah.
Yeah, and she was kind of one of those names when she went to Seattle, kind of a little bit more on the analytics side as well, too. It was a big loss for this club. So referring to the Minnesota Wild, but one of the first hires that the Kraken actually made in team history, and it certainly has paid dividends. And, I think there's something to be said, too, when you have a mind for the game and you have a mind for kind of taking what you see statistically and being able to translate that into business moves and player moves and the right personnel and the right fit for your team. Seattle had a very lackluster limelight year last year in terms of the fact that they were kind of a very meh story and the fact that they weren't really a story at all. And maybe this is something that hopefully changes that with a new direction. So the Kraken definitely looking for a little bit more traction in year number 2 of the franchise, and maybe this will help add to that.
Certainly weren't gifted a lot of the deals that Vegas was able to take advantage of too. So I think they also didn't get quite the advantages that those in Nevada did.
Kind of wild that we think, a couple years ago, we were like, how could they have not taken a chance on Carey Price? And now, look how that situation has changed.
Right? Yeah. And of course, hindsight, right? 2020, right?
So Vladimir Tarasenko?
Right. Holy cow, right? Speaking of signings and, player movements, let's go to the Lone Stars state, right? So Stars GM Jim Neal getting just a 1-year extension. Current deal expires at the end of 2023. Gets one now through 2024. And he's got still a big job to do. He still has not signed restricted free agent Jason Robertson. Supposedly the talks are ongoing, but I would imagine for Dallas Stars fans, their leading goal scorer still unsigned as we head literally on the doorstep to training camp, would have some Stars fans concerned that this young, very up and coming superstar again was essentially neck and neck for a while, a couple of years ago with Kirill Kaprizov for the Calder Trophy before Kaprizov just kept going and going, ended up taking the Calder nomination, but still a very good young piece to an offense that has been quite anemic the last couple of seasons, Noah.
Yeah, it certainly has, and I just want to pull up their cap friendly too to kind of see where they're at as well. But it sounds like the discussions have been really positive. But we've seen this before where players get closer and closer, and you don't want them to miss training camp and be on the back foot,
right?
And those sorts of things. $76.164 million is the projected hit, about $6.34 million in cap space for this club right now. So really the thought here is that you're going to have to make some sort of, well, not so much that, but if you want to retain this kid, which he should be priority, you are probably going to have to send somebody on the move. Some contract has got to go because he's worth a lot more than $6.3 million.
Yes, he is.
And push that maybe down closer to the $6 million mark with transactions and call ups and those sorts of things. I mean, he's a $8.5 million a year player at minimum, I would say.
100%.
I mean, he was just that good. And I mean, what is he, 23, 24? I mean, young.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, a 1-year extension, I think that kind of tells you all that you need to know.
100%.
So
this is a do or die year for Jim Neal for sure.
Yeah. So I kind of wonder what they're gonna do. I think this thing is done, signed, sealed, and delivered if he's got about $4 million in cap space. I don't think it's even a story here this summer, but the Stars, they're about one player or one contract too heavy right now. The Jamie Benn and Tyler Seguin contracts are really starting to look a little raw when it comes to the new addition and the new wave that is Dallas Stars hockey. And Dallas is not that North Stars fans care, but really has not gotten the benefit of any real bounces. Even when they went to the Cup final a couple years ago, it just has been kind of a rocky road down there in Tejas.
It really has been an unprecedented unprecedented. My gosh, my enunciation is not good today. But a very unforeseen run to the Stanley Cup final a couple of years ago, up there in the pod, north of the border. But let's actually go to some signings that have been inked and have been, signed. So we'll start with St. Louis. They did ink Jordan Kyrou, 8 years, $65 million. So average at $8.125 million a season. 75 points in 74 games last year. Was an all-star, just 24 years of age. That's a great contract for St. Louis. I think he's worth every penny of it. The Kings getting Sean Durzi in, 2 years, $1.7 million as the average for that one. Just his first NHL season, 27 points in 63 games played. But again, still young, only age of 23. So this guy still not even in his prime, and a pretty reasonable, good contract for
as a
Los Angeles
defenseman
Kings
as well too.
Yes. So then Colorado, I think this is going to go. I think for the most of the league, I think this is going to be a very underrated signing. How about Evan Rodriguez, 1 year, $2 million, 43 points, 82 games played. He's age 29. This is definitely more of a depth signing for Colorado. I know you had mentioned and previously off the show that, it's not necessarily the points, but his WAR, 61% projected of his WAR. Noah, because you were the stats guy, you're the analytics guy. Explain to our viewers what that means.
Yeah, so WAR stands for wins above replacement, and your percentile rank is essentially what your percentage is that you're going to both attain and exceed the wins given to your team above what a replacement player would be. So a replacement player, for example, will be a AHL top line player that's a bubble player in the National Hockey League that's called up, that's a fourth line player, just your average run of the mill like healthy scratch that gets put into the lineup. How much better in terms of percentage are they able to produce? And 61% is a pretty good number. It's a pretty healthy number. 43 points in 82 games is the first time he's eclipsed the 30-point mark in his career, and he's 29. It's like his probably fourth or fifth full season in the league, playing with the Penguins last year. Was with Buffalo for a while too. So this could turn out to be a very low risk, high reward signing for Colorado, and a team that does not have much cap space. I think it's $1.9 million now moving into the season. So this could look really good for them. The question is, can he maintain that clip? If he does, I mean, a half a point per game player at that price point is phenomenal. And he's a centerman as well too. Can play anywhere, but has the ability to play center. This could be a very nice retool and reload and really help alleviate the pain of losing Nazem Kadri to free agency down the middle.
Certainly can. Colorado, even with the loss of Nazem Kadri, I think still is up in a lot of people's boards as being, I think, still a high chance of trying to repeat for another Stanley Cup this year. I think they still have the talent there to do it. Speaking of a team that's trying to get back into the Stanley Cup playoffs, Ottawa just continues to make themselves look really good. This offseason has been swell for the Senators. They just added Tyler Mott, just a 1 year deal, $1.35 million. So you talk about low risk, high reward. 27 years old, still in his prime, still young. Only 15 points under 49 games with Vancouver. He was pointless in 9 games with the Rangers after a trade, 2 playoff goals in a total of 15 postseason career games. So again, you talk about a depth move here. I would think this is for Ottawa, but again, they're expecting Jake Sanderson back. It sounds like he's good to go for some recent reporting. So with everything that Ottawa has done, Noah, I would think at this point it would be a pretty big disappointment if Ottawa didn't crack a playoff spot this season. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to tell because you can look at so many of these players on paper and say, yep, they've got this guy, they've got that guy. It's kind of like our NCHC previews, right? It's so easy to say, oh, here's this incoming freshman who looks good. Here's this transfer who looks really good. But, it's all about how you play. And the other thing that we know, especially with an NHL schedule as opposed to college, you got to stay healthy. So if you have one or two of these guys, you talk about Jake Sanderson's recent injury at the tail end of the last NCHC season, is he ready to go? And is he ready for a full-time role at the National Hockey League level, jumping in as a young kid? A lot of question marks with this team. I think if everything rolls out right, they kind of are. Well, let's go back to the NCHC again, the Colorado College Tigers of the NHL a little bit, where we have high expectations of them if the cards fall correctly. But certainly time is obviously going to tell. So, but definitely steps in the right direction. They did not get worse over the offseason. They definitely, you can pencil them in as getting significantly better, at least on paper, to start the NHL season.
which leads us to the big PTO time as we edge towards the NHL training camps. So a couple of names that we added over the week. So Ottawa adding Derek Brassard, who's spent some time with Ottawa previously, and also Michael Del Cole. Brassard, 19 points in 49 games between Philadelphia and Edmonton. He's a veteran of 951 NHL games, 22 points and 39 games for the American Hockey League's Bridgeport for Michael Del Cole last year. And then Calgary adding both Michael Stone as well as Cody Eakin. So Michael Stone was with Calgary last year, only played in 11 regular season games, but more importantly was a playoff impact performer.
Yeah.
So 5 points in 9 playoff games. He was second on the team among defensemen in scoring. And then for Cody Eakin, he's kind of bounced around a little bit in his lately in his career, 31 years of age, 12 points and 69 games for Buffalo last year. Definitely was a little bit more of a disappointing season for him in Buffalo. Really thought that he would be a nice depth piece to boost some offense. Didn't really happen. So Flames bring him in on a PTO and see if he's able to earn himself a contract.
Is it ironic that our next topic happens to involve the San Jose Sharks right after we talk about Cody Eakin?
How about that, right?
Well, just try not to fall over this one. So the San Jose Sharks, they unveiled their new primary uniforms for the first time since 2013. Their new update here. Homes and aways were done. It's an all teal setup on the homes, and then teal pants, shells, everything, and then white uniforms. So pretty much they've taken all of the orange out of the uniforms besides what's in the logo on like the stick.
And all the black is gone essentially.
Yeah, and I know
most
a lot
of it. Yeah,
and I know a lot of people were talking about how they should have kept the black shells and the gloves and the helmet. And I'm a traditionalist, and I'm all for black, and I think it would look really well. I got to be honest with you, and I'm not a big colored shells guy. I'm a big shells and cheese guy. You ever have Velveeta shells and cheese? Those are the shells I'm talking about. But beyond that, and if you don't know what I'm talking about with shells, by the way, they're the hockey pants. I should probably clarify that for some people. But honestly, I think the all teal look, I think it looks really good. It's kind of an ode a little bit to the 90s, except they've never actually had all teal shells and everything until now. I think it's cool. I think they look really good. I like the striping. I like the simplistic design, but I think it works well with their color scheme. Have some photos of the homes and aways of guys on the ice with them already. I think they project well as far as like a TV broadcast is concerned. The numbers pop. They're really easy to read. I really like it. I like the redesign, but they kind of stayed true to their roots a little bit and didn't kind of go with this outlandish. I mean, a couple of years ago, they had the trim on the shoulders and kind of the orange trim that was going on.
Trim,
yeah. Not that was terrible. And, it's fun to mix things up.
Right?
Yeah, definitely. But I like the look. I know there's some people that are kind of not big on the all teal, and I get that. And maybe we'll have to see some black pants and helmets after year number one. But what do you think, Nick? I think they look really good.
Here's the funny thing. They did exactly what the Colorado Avalanche did just this season. They got rid of the black too, because they went with all, what was it, the not the teal, but their blue or, for their shells as well.
So the Sharks are going to win the cup this year, clearly.
Well, I'm not sure it's not going to be the Stanley Cup. I'll tell you that much. They might win the Molson Cup, meaning the cup that's filled with Molson beer, and you're winning the chug race. But
at the golf course.
Yeah, at the golf course come mid-April. But no, I agree with you. I like the look. I like the updated design. Like you said, a little bit less busy, maybe more simplistic, more modern. I do like the teal shells too. Always when we have these sort of jersey redesigns, there's always going to be people that love it. There's going to be people that hate it. At the end of it, give it a month or two and people just kind of get used to it. I don't know. I like it. I like both the home and the ways. It's a nice little look. It's not a huge change. It really is just more of a color splash, you could say. We're seeing more NHL teams do it. Again, we talked about Colorado doing away with their blacks too. So it's almost like, who's next? Who's going to ditch the blacks next at the end of the day?
It wasn't like risque either. I kind of think back to maybe the Dallas Stars and their neon design they did a couple of years ago, like 2 years ago or whatever. That's a little bit more on the edge. I also don't think with that marketing scheme they had whoever it was it Sagan with the black visor and that that I think was kind of off-putting because that's just not a hockey thing.
That was just a tribute to Ovechkin back in the day. Remember the smoked visor,
right? But no one's ever worn a visor that dark. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like it just doesn't make sense. So I think that was maybe like it kind of reminded me a little bit more of like NFL running backs, maybe.
That's fair.
So I don't know. This is a little less risque. And of course, this is a primary jersey too, so it kind of has to be a little bit more subdued. But I think if I had to rate it, I would say 8 out of 10. I think they did a really good job, to be honest with you. 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10, somewhere around there. You think?
Nice. Yeah, I'm with you on that.
Yeah. All right. Well,
Could be worse.
how about 10 out of 10s here? And we're going to throw it back to 1970, apparently, our second to last topic.
Oh, boy.
The Montreal Canadiens named Nick Suzuki the 31st captain in team history, 149 points in 203 NHL games. He's just 23 years of age. So that was cool. Really exciting. A lot of people talked about maybe a veteran like Brendan Gallagher getting the call, which he has an assistant captain role as it is. Mm-hmm. Maybe as a guy that maybe is a little bit of trade bait as he enters the last, year or two of his contract. I can't remember how many he's got left, but he's getting there. And they just kind of want to look towards the future for Montreal. And it sounds like he's a really good locker room guy from, it wasn't just, oh, we're going to pick a young kid to pick a young kid. It sounds like he really does have some good leadership ability. But my favorite
Vegas is, regretting that trade at all.
Yeah. Yikes.
Oh my goodness.
My favorite part about this though, is Quebec politicians. So obviously, if you don't know, in Eastern Canada, especially around Quebec, Ontario, a little bit more French speaking historically. And some politicians think the new Habs captain should learn French, which is kind of akin to something you see in other sports where certain teams won't sign a guy unless he can speak the language and that sort of thing. And Nick Suzuki, he fired back and he said, yeah, not happening. It's not 1970. Time to move on, which I think is awesome because somebody made a really good point on Twitter, which of course is the most factual platform known to man today. Yes. And they talked about how some of these other places that are comparables, like European soccer clubs, football clubs, whatever you want to call it, they won't sign a guy unless he can speak German, unless he can speak whatever it is. Well, the difference is a lot of these places and clubs that do that, that's the primary language, or a lot of people maybe don't speak English. There's a lot of people that speak English, in French speaking Canada, and he's there to play hockey. He's not there to, not that he can't be an advocate as the Canadiens captain, but yeah, not a necessary thing. He can write and read in French. He just is learning how to speak. I don't know. The kid can put the puck in the net, and he's a great captain already.
So
yeah. So I mean, what do you think as a media guy yourself? Is it a logical thing for them to ask that?
No, absolutely not. I mean, it just shows you. Now, granted, Montreal, the traditionalist hockey throne of the North American circuit, effectively. The story is not new, to say the least. I mean, part of the reason, Michel Therrien was a coach because he was able to speak French. I mean, it's kind of like, what do you want to call it? I mean, you talk about the country club atmosphere, it really is, but more of like a hometown sort of angle to it. Whereas they really want to be able to have like that sort of connection to the organization. And for them, that connection is the French language. It's at least from our perspective, it seems odd, right? Because we're not there. And I get it. They're crazy about their hockey out there. I get it. At the same time,
be realistic.
When was the last time that Montreal won a cup? 93?
Yeah, and subsequently, it was about the last time that they actually had a French, like true French speaking and French, I believe French born captain, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. Also, yours truly spent some time, with TSN 690, which is in Montreal. I spent a better part of a couple of seasons previewing the Wild and then the NHL with that kind of stuff. So I was on there quite regularly. Well, if you actually watch the NHL medias in Montreal, there's both a French and an English television and radio outlet. So it's like to think that just having him to speak French is the only option available. Clearly, that's not the case. So.
The last one was actually Vincent Dampius back in 1999, 98, 99. And then, of course, Saku Koivu for a number of years, Brian Gionta for about 4.5 seasons, and Max Pacioretty for 3.5, Shea Weber for 3, and now Nick Suzuki. So, and then before that, you had Guy Charbonneau, Chris Chelios, Bob Gainey for a long time. So, Yeah, I mean, I don't know. The kid can put the puck in the net, and that's all I got to say about that.
Well, if you're Montreal fans, that's all you should care about
Yeah.
is if you want to win a Stanley Cup. Granted, you're probably further away from that now than you were just a couple of seasons ago,
Right.
and that remarkable one. But regardless of you hoist a Stanley Cup, the first words out of his mouth aren't French or English. I don't really think you care, honestly.
Yeah, and we know what they are, and regardless, you're probably going to just hear a big long beep when
Pretty much.
that would ever happen. Speaking of
Right.
beeps for the Chicago Blackhawks, our final national topic here. Defenseman Jake McCabe will miss 10 to 12 weeks after undergoing successful cervical spine surgery.
Sounds painful.
Yeah, just ask Jack Eichel. The current recovery timeline projects McCabe to return between late November and early December. So he appeared in 75 games, 22 points, averaging just over 20 minutes per contest last season.
And also, just a quick note on that too, Noah was actually skating with the club just recently. Obviously, no contact, but it sounds like it was more of a minor procedure. Not that any surgery is minor,
Yeah.
but it sounds like he was actually skating. So more precautionary for the 10 to 12 weeks just to make sure everything heals. But sounds like doing okay.
Yeah. Speaking of doing okay, we're going to head on to our final NCHC preview in the main portion of the show. And welcome into episode number 129, the main portion of the show. Nick Maxon joining myself, Noah Grant here, as always here, recording mid to late afternoon here on this Saturday, September 17th, pushing down to the wire of the start of both college hockey and some NHL hockey. I think, Nick, we talked a little bit off show before we started about recording times. We're going to be recording on Sunday next week, I'm pretty sure, so we might have a mid to late afternoon Sunday release, or at worst a Monday morning release for next week's show. What's going to be in that, you ask? Well, we're actually going to do a Minnesota Wild preview as well too. It's not going to be as in-depth as some of the NCHC ones that we do. It's going to be a little bit more kind of raw and on the fly like our show normally is, because I don't have the time to do any more stats. I am done searching stats. I am done doing
It only took you on episode 129 to figure that out.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, about 2 to 3. This one especially. Yeah. A lot, because you want to get it right. And I think one of the things to point out, we had a good conversation with Caleb Peabody the other day. Jack Burbix is headed to Western Michigan, kind of under the radar. We also missed, I think, another transfer or two for the Broncos as well. And for us, and one of the goals that we had for this, it's kind of more to just get people excited and, kind of give them a rundown of what we think about the college season coming up, as we're obviously excited. With that being said, we spend, like I said, 2 to 3 hours, sometimes even 4, trying to put each team's package together. Man, things change. Guys get signed at the last second. It's easy to miss things. You still got some transfer portals going on. So we get that we're not going to be perfect. That's one of the things that we miss with Jack Burbix, headed to Western Michigan. But with that being said, I mean, it doesn't detract from how excited we are to see the Broncos, which the Huskies only have them once this season, actually. So yeah, just kind of wanted to throw that out there too, because I know that, occasionally we'll hear that where it's like, well, you missed this, or did you also notice this? Yeah. We appreciate it. We appreciate our listeners and viewers being eagle-eyed and having some of that information, but where we're at, we're doing the best we can. And we're just excited to get ready for the college hockey season here and talk about a team, the St. Cloud State Huskies, Nick. And you're going to like this. This did send me down a rabbit hole.
There's something new.
Yeah. St. Cloud obviously plays at the Herb Brooks National Hockey Center, built in 1989, renovated in 2013, and then 2022 with the new video boards and sound system, obviously. Capacity of 5,159 in the Granite City there in St. Cloud, Minnesota. So, Nick, it got me thinking, because there's something about the Herb Brooks National Hockey Center that makes it relatively unique amongst hockey rinks out there. Do you have any idea what that might be?
Is it the Olympic sheet?
Wow, look at you. It's almost like you know what you're talking about. So
I pretend most times.
I dug into that a little bit, and I thought the 63 teams now that are in the NCAA, not including Alabama Huntsville, so technically 64, but Alabama Huntsville has a normal size sheet. How many Olympic sheets are there in NCAA Division I hockey?
5.
You are close. There's 4.
I knew there because Colorado College did have Olympic. They now gone down to NHL.
Yep.
Yeah. So there was one.
St. Cloud's obviously another. Can you name the other 3?
I what's funny. I looked at this for a broadcast last year at the HP. Wasn't one of the Alaska schools one of them?
You are correct. Alaska Fairbanks, the Carlson Center, built in 1990, 4,595 capacity. There's another one that is in the state of hockey.
Oh, yeah, Mariucci, duh.
Yep, 3M.
Okay.
Yeah, capacity of 10,000, built in 1993.
And then, oh, geez.
I don't think you'll get the last one. It is out east, I'll give you that much.
I remember the out east one was sort of not a familiar name, if I recall correctly. Is that right?
Yeah. Yep. Funny ties to Minnesota. The last time they were in a national championship game, New Hampshire.
New Hampshire. Okay.
The Whittemore Center, 6,501 is capacity, built in 1994. However, Nick, we're not done. There is a list of larger than NHL size, but less than Olympic size sheets in NCAA Division I hockey. So they are,
good Lord, they
are larger than 200 by 85. Every rink in the NCAA is 200 feet long. So that's consistent, at least. But they are larger than 85 feet wide, but they are less than 100 feet wide. How many of these rinks exist in college hockey?
I imagine there's more than we probably realize. So let's go with 10.
You're really close, actually. 11. Very, very nice job. Congrats. Well, let's run through. I listed them in order, not by alphabetical order, but I listed them by size. So we're getting wider as we go.
Sure.
Kind of like my life after I continue to eat cheeseburgers. Let's start here. Boston College, the Conte Forum, the Kelly Rink, built in 1988, 200 by 87, as is
a foot on each side.
Yeah,
effectively.
As is Harvard's Bright Hockey Center, which was built originally in 1956. Army Tate Rink is 200 by 90. A lot of these are 200 by 90, actually. So Army, BU, Dartmouth, Minnesota State Mankato, actually. I didn't know that. The Mayo Clinic Event Center, Northeastern, and Vermont Gutterson Fieldhouse have all been built at 200 by 90, including Northeastern's Matthews Arena, which was originally theoretically conceived in 1909.
Oh, boy.
So 1909 for them, 1963 for Vermont, Mankato, of course, in 1995, Dartmouth in 1975, BU in 2005, and then Army in 1985, where I've actually gotten a chance to skate at Tate Rink. It's actually a pretty nice little building there. Not a big facility, it seats just over 2,600, but all 200 by 90. We have 3 left here, Nick, and this is where it gets really weird, I think. UMass at the William D. Mullins Center, capacity of 8,373, built in 1993, 200 by 95.
Interesting.
As is Notre Dame, the Compton Family Ice Arena, 5,022 is capacity, which was built, oddly enough, in 2011.
Wow. So even that's interesting,
isn't it?
That's very interesting.
I thought so too. Our last one, I'm gonna see if you can guess this. This arena was built in 1998 and it has a capacity of 15,237.
Oh, North Dakota?
No, North Dakota is just 11.5.
11.5.
This is the second largest rink in Division I hockey right now. The first is Ohio State. You're gonna kick yourself when I tell you it.
Probably.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you this. St. Cloud has them on the schedule this year. If you've gotten a chance to look at the schedule,
it's not UMD, is it?
It is not UMD. It is Wisconsin, the Kohl Center.
Kohl Center. I was thinking the Kohl Center.
The Kohl Center is 200 feet long by 97 feet wide.
That's right, because the Kohl Center they use for basketball too, don't they?
Isn't that weird?
I should have thought of that. Oh, I'm kicking myself now. Jeez.
I knew you were going to kick yourself, but that's weird. Also, the Kohl Center, I always forget the Kohl Center holds a ton of people. Actually a great hockey rink, to be honest with you. But speaking of hockey rinks, the Herbert's National Hockey Center, like we mentioned, is the home of Brett Larson, head coach of the Huskies in his 5th season, along with Dave Shayak in his 3rd. Assistant coach RJ Enga, his 1st season behind the bench as an assistant, his 2nd total with the team, and 9th in the NCHC, of course, was with the Colorado College Tigers for 7 years. Goaltending coach is Matt Bertram in his 5th year. Hockey ops, Clark Custer in his 1st season, making the transition from the St. Cloud Norsemen to the NHL. And then others, of course, because this is St. Cloud State, so we're going to mention them. Brian DeMaine, who's the trainer, Jake Franzik, who's the strength coach, and Jeremiah Minkel, the equipment manager, are the other notables there. As we get ready for what is going to be a very exciting season, but first, we can't talk about this year without the last, Nick, right? Because that's how we do things on this show.
Yes.
We like to work backwards. 37 games played overall for this team, 24 conference, 10 non-conference, no exhibition games for this club last season, 2 conference playoff games. We know how those went, and 1 NCAA tournament appearance game. So the pairwise, 10th out of 59 for a 5.65 winning percentage. They were 4th out of 8, excuse me. Yeah, 4th out of 8 in the NCHC.
Technically,
Yep, 36 points. They did win that tiebreaker against Duluth, and Duluth paid them back for it handily last season.
Yes.
Overall, 18, 15, and 4 last season, 10, 10, and 4, exactly identical with Duluth in the conference. 11, 5, and 3 at home, actually. Pretty good little home split, actually. The 3 ties was a little tough. 7 and 9 and 1 on the road, though, and 0 and 1 in neutral sites, including a 1, 4, and 4 overtime appearance. They had the most overtime and shootout appearances of any team by far in the NCHC last season. That's going to be a huge point. And they were 1 and 3 in overtimes that did not go to a shootout. So it just did, not great.
Wasn't good.
Yeah, so
doesn't help when your jersey's tugged either.
Yeah, certainly not. Well, let's talk about the opponents with the wins and the losses. And Nick, when I was putting this together, and I think I really started to get a better appreciation after going through some of the teams that we had previously. There are some numbers in here. There are some goal scorers in here. There are some splits in here that, yes, you had the 12-2 drubbing of St. Thomas and the 19 goal weekend or whatever against Miami. That probably skews things a little bit. But regardless, this team, at least statistically, had better numbers than the top teams in the NCHC in some capacity. Really interesting year for this team last year. And we talked a little bit about them being a little bit like maybe Denver, the year prior in the pod, where they were just kind of in that weird spot where they really didn't find that cohesion that was expected. On the whole, starting off with just the information I've given you, St. Cloud's season last year, how do you even begin to summarize it?
Well, I think frustrating is actually the best word, because at the end of it, at least from a fan's perspective, and I say that just because, again, with so many players returning from the national championship run, which I know the expectations are so much higher, right? And then you get in some transfers, you have some freshmen coming in, and you really just kind of think, okay, what could this team, with the little that was subtracted, I mean, what would be the obstacle, right? And it ended up being that it was themselves, honestly. And I think you really, when you break it down, as you look at the whole season, I mean, that was kind of it. They're just, for whatever reason, just the magic wasn't there. And so I think, again, from the casual fans perspective, it was just a question of why, because not a lot changed. But then let's bring in the hockey, IQ here, Noah, is that when you are a national runner-up, your film is broken down piece by piece. And whether it's your own conference, whether it's non-conference opponents, they study you. They studied, hey, what was their makeup? What was their strategy? What did they do? You've got targets on your back. And so I don't know if it's a bit of a hangover, to it. I think there was a little bit to it. But the reality is, when you play that much more hockey and you got teams that are trying to replicate your success, and number two, trying to slow you down, especially when a lot of the same players are back. It's like anything else. You're trying to find the weak chain in the system, and how can we take down a team that was arguably very good in all facets of the game. And it's tough to repeat. It just is in college hockey. It's so difficult, and unfortunately, St. Cloud learned that the hard way last season.
They did, and it's interesting again, theoretically, so let's say this, scoring by period, plus 27 in period number 1, outscoring their opponents 44-17 in the first period, so you can tell when they had a really good start, it was good. We'll get back to that in a second. Outscoring opponents 50-34 for a plus 16 rating in period number 2, and then outscored by a differential of 4, 38-42 in period 3, and -3 in overtime, because it's kind of hard to claw back after you've allowed one in OT.
Right.
So a 133-97 differential, which is plus 36, which is one of the best in the NCHC. Now, here's the thing. If you take the St. Thomas game and then the weekend essentially from Miami, and let's say you give the Huskies a 1-goal win in each of those 3 blowout games, I think it still comes to like plus 9 or something like that without that, which isn't terrible. But some of these splits that St. Cloud had, plus 166 in the shot differential, they were positive in every period except for overtime, including a plus 114 differential in the opening period. Very, very good. 17-7-1 when scoring first, and they were exactly 500, 7-7 when they were scored on first. When they were outshooting their opponent, 14-6-3. When they were outshot, they were 4-8, so they were still in those games. Here's where it gets interesting, Nick. Leading after 15-4-1, good splits. 17-2-2, great. Like closing out hockey games or at least pushing them into extras here. 1-goal games, 2-6 in 1-goal games.
Yep.
0-4-2 when trailing after period number 1.
Yep.
And 0-10-2 when trailing after period number 2. They are the only team in the NCHC to not get an outright regulation victory when trailing after period number 1 and when trailing after period number 2. When they were tied after period number 1, they were 3-7-1. And they were 1-3 when tied after period number 2. So can we definitively say, Nick, the starts for this team were extremely imperative for a group that actually averaged 4.5 shots more per game than their opponent, and outshot their opponents on many given nights?
We saw that too when we watched them play. I think we talked about ad nauseum, if anything, which is, one of the, sort of the ingredients to the season beforehand was you never got the sense going from regular season to the NCHC tournament to even tournament time that even if they were scored on first, they just never seemed bothered by it.
Yeah.
They had a sense of calm and confidence about themselves as a team, right? Whereas this year, and maybe the mentality was the same, the execution certainly was not there. You could certainly tell that they were fighting an uphill battle when they were trailing. It just never seemed to me, and I'm curious your thoughts on this, Noah, too, that dare I say that, was it, and I characterize it as they were their own worst enemies to me. It just felt like the team just were gripping the sticks too tight, that they were kind of enveloped in the pressure of this follow-up season. And for whatever reason, they just couldn't quite put together an effort to get them back into a hockey game, either A, to tie it, or 2, to put themselves some distance between the two. It just didn't feel like the team just really could pull it together. And by those numbers, hard to argue that.
Yeah, certainly. And I want to make sure that I get the right game here. There is actually a game that ends up, I think, encompassing the entire St. Cloud season from last year. And I'm curious to see, one, if you can guess the opponent, first of all, that it might have come against. Any idea which opponent I might be referencing?
North Dakota.
It is not North Dakota. It's an opponent that we have seen quite a bit of in the last couple of years.
Duluth, then.
Yeah, Duluth. And I'm trying to figure out which game it was here. It was the night in which it might have been the 1-1 tie, or maybe the 2-0. Yeah, it might have been
the last weekend of the series or season.
No, it was the game where
at the Herb.
It was at the Herb Brooks National Hockey Center. It was the game where Ryan Fanti absolutely stood on his head. And that was the game where, for reference here, St. Cloud 45 for 145, a 31% power play clip, basically the best in the NCHC, one of the best in the country, actually. That kind of ran a little bit bone dry towards the end of the season.
Yeah, it did.
Very good special teams wise, PK wise, though, 81.7% on 131 kills, only allowed 24 power play goals. Really, actually good.
That's good
on that side of things. Scoring wise, they average basically a goal more per game overall and average 0.62 goals per game more in the conference. So actually some pretty good numbers, 3.59 to 3.5 goals for per game. But
I would imagine, though, I don't mean to interject here, but I imagine
by those weekends.
Yes. Yeah. I bet you take those out of the picture, those numbers don't look nearly as good.
Certainly. But the other piece is, giving up 2.62 goals against overall and 2.88 goals against in the conference. I mean, not the greatest, but not a terrible amount. You're still staying around that too. They always say if you can give up less than 3, you give yourself a chance to win a hockey game. And the game that I'm talking about was the game the Huskies must have had about 4 or 5 power play chances, and Duluth was blocking shots left and right, and it felt like St. Cloud could not get a shot through. And there was a lot of frustration about how this power play that had been such a well-oiled machine suddenly could not find the back of the net. And they were generating chances. They were generating zone time. They're generating possession. They were doing a lot of those little things right, But the one thing that they were doing was overcomplicating the game. Like you had mentioned, they were forcing plays. They were trying to kind of create plays that weren't there. And one of the things that the team the year before, like you mentioned, was so good at is they kind of took what is given. Nolan Walker flipping a puck 25 feet in the air, landing a Micah Miller stick in the slot after a battle on the boards in the NCAA
just
regionals.
like they drew it up, right?
Yeah, definitely. Just floating pucks toward the net. Dave Shyack grease pan goals, just being willing to get back to simplifying the game. And we see that so much with so many teams that falter in the regular season of the playoffs, or for over the course of whatever it is, they make the game too difficult on themselves when they're a team that otherwise has a lot of skill. And when that happens, when it feels like the game is getting frustrating and you can't get things going, you go back to the basics. You simplify the game. North-south hockey, pucks in deep. The one thing you can control is not the bounces, but you can control how hard you move your feet, how hard you work, how tenacious you are on pucks. Are you winning battles in the corner? Do you have a better energy level than the other team? Then you establish zone time. That's step number 2. After you establish zone time, before you start snapping it around and trying to create these beautiful cycle plays in the corner, are you generating shot lanes to the net? Are you creating second chance opportunities? Are you shooting the puck a lot? And the shot statistics say, yes, this St. Cloud team shot a lot of pucks on net, but it didn't really translate to scoring sometimes. And that's something that really kind of bit them in the end because, like you said, the team before, they also, I feel like, put a fair number of pucks on net, but every puck had a purpose. It wasn't, we're trying to snap it around and go east to west and then to the bumper in the middle, and that's got to be the play. No, if you have a shot lane and you see it, grip it and rip it. I mean, you're a good hockey player, 50, 60, 70 feet from the net, pick a corner and let it rip. Sometimes I think hockey players need to be a little bit more selfish and take what's given. And St. Cloud, especially in that game, did a lot of little things right, but there were a couple of little things that really weren't that wrong. But for a team that was as middling at times as St. Cloud was last year, they can be the detrimental factor that turns your 1-goal game differential into a 2-6 record, and why you're 0-4-2 and 0-10-2 when trailing after 1 in period number 2, because you get in your own head thinking that you can't solve this puzzle.
Or Ryan Fanti was living rent free in their heads too. I think. I mean, but it goes to your point because I'm starting to get that game back, even to my memory too. And clearly looking at the overpassing on the power play. And clearly looking at, you could just see the not only the frustration, you could see almost the desperation of them just trying to get a puck through, but instead it was kind of doing it blindly, whereas they were shooting right into shin pads where Duluth was blocking those lanes, especially from the point. And instead of, like you mentioned, where maybe that puck goes to the half wall and, and Duluth, you got to get, first of all, we should say Duluth does really, really good late in the season about getting into shooting lanes. They're really good defensively in their own zone. But also it's more just like you said, not looking for those pretty NHL 22 goals, right? It was more just, if you have a lane, you're not trying to pick a corner. Sometimes just get it to the net. And then, as you mentioned, we've talked about this before, the Dave Shyack, essentially coaching where you just get to the net, you drive to the area in front of the blue paint. You look to either create chaos, you look to take away a goaltender's vision, or heck, you end up with a loose puck and you bury it on the rebound. Back in that game, you could definitely tell it was like trying to go back door to, like you said, to the bumper play. They wanted the for sure play in their minds, like they wanted to move Ryan Fanti east-west. But as we saw, he's an athletic goaltender. He read the plays very well. And again, the Duluth defense in front of him really took away a lot of what they were trying to do to make him move east-west. So, and again, it goes to just, as a player, taking your hockey IQ and, again, just not overthinking it. Like, just simplify it, as you mentioned. Try to get it puck through, and if you can't, well, don't, like you said, at some point you start forcing plays that aren't there, and that's where St. Cloud really shot themselves in the foot. And as you mentioned, that was kind of a microcosm of what ended up really hurting them down the road, which is they didn't really have this confidence to come back into hockey games.
Right, and I believe it was February 22nd was the night.
That sounds right. Yeah.
Which, ironically enough, would happen to be the 42nd anniversary of Miracle on Ice. February 22nd, 1980. There you go. Herb Brooks National Hockey Center. Ironic. But beyond that, the other stat that I had as far as the stat line goes, minus 1.19 penalties and minutes per game by team less, 10.19 to 11.38. So actually not a highly penalized team, I think, as much as we wanted to make it. They really weren't.
They really I think the key was, and we talked about this too, was it was sometimes the timing of their penalties, which was I think a killer at some points, and then more so, especially early in the season, some very not just untimely, but some sort of unneeded penalties.
Undisciplined.
Yes, undisciplined, correct.
Yep. So 4 graduates, 7 seniors, 8 juniors, 4 sophomores, and 4 freshmen for a crew of 27 last season for this group. And topping this list with a very good point production. In fact, statistically, I believe would actually lead the North Dakota Fighting Hawks that we covered last week in terms of points. He would definitely lead in goals here. Kevin Fitzgerald in his graduate season, what a year he had.
What a year he had.
Oh my gosh.
Considering too, right? Real quick, that he nearly hung up the skates.
Yeah. I mean,
on this show, he said, I'm not sure if I'll come back for another year. And after talking to Brett, and it sounded like the message was, well, yes, you're going to do something other than hockey at some point, but if you got the opportunity to play and do it professionally, well, you only get a small window. And he took it, and wow, what a year he had.
Yeah, what the quote from Brett Larson, something like, you'll look back and you'll say, gosh, I wish I would have played another year of hockey. You're not going to look back and say, gosh, I wish I would do another year of accounting. You know?
Yeah.
So, which totally true. 17 goals, 19 assists, 36 points, and 37 contests for him last season. A .97 point per game clip, 7 power play tucks to go along with a +12 rating. Phenomenal. What a great season. He was a guy that, as his St. Cloud career progressed, just continued to get better. He didn't have these lows where he went up and down. I mean, it was a steady incline in the way that he progressed as a player, and just a great down to earth guy, and super funny, kind of the ultimate jokester and ultimate prankster in some senses. So, just ask Al Appleby. Yami Kranila, who was a junior last season, 37 games played for him, 0.81 points per game clip, 5 power play goals, and a +6 rating with 30 points in the season, dead even, 15 goals, 15 assists. Another player who has really inclined steadily, as has Zach Okabe in that same class as a junior. Kind of, again, I'm going to use
line too.
I'm going to use it, Nick. It's been a while since I've used the word. What word am I going to use? Any idea? Buzzsaw, yes. I love the way he plays. 28 points for him in 37 contests as well. 17 assists, tied for, I believe, third on the team last year. Very good season for him. 0.76 points per game clip. Easton Bronzinski in his graduate year was actually 4th on the team in scoring, 1 less point at 27. Down year in terms of his goal scoring, but had 12 goals last season, 15 assists, 1 less game played, and a 0.75 points per game clip, +2, and 4 power play tucks as well. A lot of power play tucks in this scoring group, which obviously might be skewed a little bit by those games against Miami and St. Thomas, like we talked about, because there were a lot of power play goals. But I mean, you got to score. I mean, that's
right.
And that's taking what is given. I mean, obviously, blowout games, but you're taking what is given. Nolan Walker, Wcha Rivalries, and Sam Henches round out this list as a senior, sophomore, and senior. 24, 23, and 22 points, respectively. 3 power play goals, 5 and 6 tucks, respectively. -9 rating for Nolan Walker, though. One of the few players to be minus, and he was like really minus.
Yeah.
Kind of interesting. I don't know if they put him in a lot of defensive zone situations. I can't really remember why that would be the reasoning for that. But I mean, especially as the 4 group was kind of an outlier there. So odd.
Yeah. Very odd.
With that being said, Sam Henches was +8 and had a 1.1 points per game clip, 22 points in 20 games played. Had the same number of goals as Easton Bronzinski with 12 last season. Like I said, +8. Micah Miller led with +18 rating. He's back this year. And then that Josh Lidke in his freshman year was +17.
He was, wow, was he good? Yeah. I think he kind of took a little bit of the limelight away from Jack Peart, honestly, for just how well he played. And, dare I say, when we kind of break down the roster, I've got a bold prediction with Josh Lidke coming up for his sophomore season.
Okay, so you believe he's going to be the new Nick Perbix. We get it, man. We get it. We do.
How'd you know? So
because he had a great freshman year, and that's not to take anything away from Peart, as you had mentioned. It's just Josh kind of excelled, especially in the second half, more than we anticipated. So why don't we open that up right now?
Sure.
So, because we're going to talk about our top defenseman, shocker, Nick Perbix, in his senior season, 31 games for him, 31 points. That would be a points per game clip of
1 per game.
Nice. Look at you go.
Yeah, wow.
6 tucks, led the team with 25 apples, a power play goal, and a +3 rating. And obviously logged a lot of heavy minutes, so that plus minus gets skewed by playing so many minutes. Josh Lidke, maybe a little bit more sheltered, but really kind of turned into that second power play unit quarterback, so to speak.
He did.
And really kind of took the reins from your eyes. I mean, you're high on the kid. What did you see over the course of the year that kind of allowed him to play with more confidence as the season went along?
Just poise. He was very poised with the puck. And I think one of the things that he does that Jack Peart really doesn't do is he feels confident and poised to skate the puck out of the zone. He's really good at assessing the situation, not panicking, not just trying to get the puck off his stick, but he's got the confidence and the ability to skate through, either to get it to the red line, make a good dump. He can relieve pressure not only with the skates, but also with the stick too. I just think that he's got a really good vision for the ice, and he's not afraid, nor feels like he has to sit behind the net, wait for a line change. He feels like he can relieve pressure in multiple ways, and didn't really ever feel like, to me, he was ever really under duress with the puck on his stick behind his own net.
Well, let's say in the rare occasion he was another player that had a really good season last year, David Ranier in net for his graduate season, 2.26 goals against, a 914 save percentage in just under 1,800 minutes, 3 shutouts to go along with a 16-11-4 record. Next closest, of course, Jackson Castor playing in 9 contests last year, and Joey Lamoureux a single appearance. So notable player moves and graduating players. We had actually a lot of player movement for St. Cloud this season. Goaltender Joey Lamoureux, he's ready for his senior season. He's headed to Anchorage. Forward Thomas Rocco, who will be a senior this year, he's headed to SUNY Oswego in Division 3, which seems like they get some pretty good crowds out there, and they also have some pretty sick threads as well too. So best of luck to him. And then Jack Johnston as well, heading Division 3 to Wisconsin Eau Claire for his junior season, I believe.
Yes.
As far as players graduating, David Ranier signed with the LA Kings. He was a graduate player last year. Kevin Fitzgerald and Seamus Donahue on the back end both signed with South Carolina in the ECHL and the Stingrays. Easton Bronzinski as a graduate to the New York Rangers. He's with the Hartford Wolfpack right now in the AHL. Luke Jaycox was the only graduate who had yet to sign with anybody at this time of recording. And then, of course, Nick Perbix foregoing his graduate year eligibility to sign with the Tampa Bay Lightning organization heading to Syracuse.
Yep.
Other senior Nolan Walker signing with Toronto. He was with the Marlies organization right now. And then, of course, Sam Henches foregoing his graduate year to sign with the Minnesota Wild. So, yeah, that's something that I think a lot of people had their eyes on. Sam Henches really kind of had, I don't want to say a breakout year, but between going to the Olympics and then having, the success that he had, maybe he felt that the jump was time. Notable players coming in, Nick, graduate player by the name of Grant Cruikshank from Minnesota. Defenseman Dylan Anhorn, who's a senior from Union. And then, of course, goaltender Dominic Bassey, junior from Colorado College. Players staying, Spencer Meyer, graduate defenseman. Micah Miller. Yeah, that's actually, we're going to cover that in our extra ice session for those who are curious about that. Micah Miller, graduate forward, they're all graduates. Aiden Spellacy and Brendan Bushy is going to stay as well. So this season's group, 5 graduate players, 7 seniors, 4 juniors, 3 sophomores, 8 freshmen for a crew of 27. Now, I say 8 freshmen, Nick, and people are going to say, no, it's 7 freshmen. Hold on. Everybody take a deep breath here. 5 freshmen on the forward end because Ryan Rosborough was actually a redshirt freshman. And we did it last week too with Caleb Johnson in net for North Dakota. So we're doing it again. So everybody take a deep breath in Huskies Nation. 15 forwards, 9 defensemen, 3 goaltenders, 5 freshman forwards, 2 freshman defensemen, and a freshman netminder that actually I don't think is getting as much love for some of the numbers that he has. I think he's going to do pretty well coming in this season. But Nick, is there anything you wanted to talk about the player moves? Actually, let's start with this. Normally we jump into the freshmen here. I want your thoughts on the transfers here because this is St. Cloud hockey. We're not talking about North Dakota. We're not talking about Western Michigan. Who's Grant Cruikshank, if you've never heard of him, or his mom for that matter? Who's Dylan Anhorn? And what's the deal with this goaltender that's a Tiger that's no longer a Tiger that somehow knows RJ Enga?
Somehow knows him. So Dominic Basie, Chicago Blackhawks draft pick. He's 6'6". He's a big goaltender.
Yeah.
Probably felt like there was an opportunity here coming into to St. Cloud and maybe earning the number one spot. I would think that the addition of Caden Mbarico going to Colorado College maybe felt like maybe wasn't going to get the job.
Yeah.
Maybe, I'm guessing. I can't say for sure, but that's it's good to have a little competition, as you mentioned, because there's still Jackson Castor on the goaltending duo. And then again, that freshman, is it James Gray?
It is James Gray, not the KVSC James Gray.
I was going to say, yeah, not the KVSC general manager, but James Gray, the Ontario Junior Hockey League product, so OJHL. And as you mentioned,
easy to confuse the two, surely.
Very much so. But as you mentioned, not getting as much praise for, I just think for the numbers that he had, but we'll get into that a little bit.
Yep.
Dylan Anhorn, again, just under their veteran presence in the blue line, which I think we'll talk about later, is probably going to be the strength of this club this year.
And family follows us on Twitter. Let's not forget that, Nick.
Let's not forget that. And then you mentioned about Grant Cruikshank. You spent some time with the Gophers and then also with Colorado College. He's been around as a graduate. Is going to provide some needed depth down the middle that and we'll address maybe some tidbits about that as well.
Yeah, listener questions. Let's ask this question too. I just want to go one more Grant Cruikshank question. But what about this, Nick? He had a down year in Minnesota last year. What's the deal? Why is he bouncing around between teams? What do you have to say about that?
Sometimes when you change teams, right? You think the pastures are green, and then you get to it and you actually execute it, and then you realize maybe it just isn't a good fit. I still think Grant Cruikshank is a world-class player. I think that he was, overshadowed by some of the high-end talent that's in Minnesota. And I just think that also stylistically, I think he's going to pair better in the NCHC in terms of his style of play versus Bob Motzko and the system running in the University of Minnesota. Again, sometimes we see this in the NHL too, right? It doesn't matter. Sometimes you bring in a player. Dare I use the Minnesota Wild example just to twist the knife a little bit? How about the Marty Hansel Ryan Jones trade, and who ended up actually looking better, Ryan Jones? So, but seriously, just sometimes it's not necessarily on the player, but sometimes just the system and the alignments and just things that you just can't control end up not working out. And doesn't mean that he's not a bad player. It maybe just means the environment he was in, the opportunities he was given or maybe not given, just weren't maybe up to. It wasn't just a good fit.
Well, let's talk about opportunities. 8 freshmen, of course, going to get their chance here. Nick, like I said, 5 forwards, 2 defensemen, 1 goaltender. Where do you want to start? We'll
start with the forward group because that has the most intrigue for me.
All right. Well, some kid from Savage, Minnesota, 5'10", 150, left-handed, 2002, Grant Ashawn. It's not Akon. It's not Akon. It is Ashawn.
Yes.
And yeah, well, part of the reason you might know that if you're a Huskies fan, he is the younger brother of course, former St. Cloud State captain Jack Ashawn, who is now with the Boston Bruins organization. Joins the Huskies, 2 seasons in junior hockey, played 1 year in the NAHL, and then 1 in the USHL. So 16 points and +3 in 45 games with the Bismarck Bobcats 2 years ago. Bobcats, kind of a struggle bus of a team the past couple of years, although did better than the Minotauros last season. It's fine. And then 25 points in 61 games for Cedar Rapids in the USHL last season. Before that, 3 seasons at Burnsville High School, 25 goals, 43 assists, 68 points in 68 games, which, Nick, would be a points per game clip of
1.
Look at you go, man. We are nailing the math today.
Wow.
Keeping it simple, right? But the math certainly doesn't lie. You know what's interesting, though? Grant does not look like his brother at all.
No.
He just doesn't, except maybe on the ice. And again, coming in a little bit undersized-ish, not as much as his brother was in terms of height, but weight. Certainly we talked about that freshman discrepancy at being 150 pounds. but he's a forward, not a defenseman, a different game
Mm-hmm.
in the NCHC. We've discussed this a little bit. How do you think that's going to translate? Not eye-popping numbers coming from the USHL, but certainly enough to be formidable.
I think if there's one thing Grant Ashawn is going to help shore up, and one of the things I think the Huskies lineup was missing a little bit last year was a little bit of toughness, a little bit of physicality in their bottom six.
Yeah.
As we know with Wcha Ashawn, and then obviously his another brother of Wisconsin. I'm trying to remember his name. My goodness, I can't believe I'm forgetting this. But with Grant Ashawn, I expect a little bit of that tenacity, a little bit of that feistiness. Somebody that can go in and get his nose dirty. Sort of work pucks out of the corners, maybe take a little bit of beating in front of the net, and just not be afraid to go in and do battle. And I think, as you mentioned, eye-popping numbers, but as we talked about with the Huskies national championship tournament, we go back to that fourth line and how they not necessarily had the offensive numbers, but they played a much more important role in terms of keeping the opposing team's numbers down too. And I think Grant Ashawn, at least initially, is going to look into something like a third line role, maybe a fourth line role to get him started, but definitely be more of a shutdown type role. And I think he's got all the tools to make that happen, especially with his, he plays with an edge. We'll put it to you that way.
Yeah, Roman Ashawn was the other one.
Roman, yes.
For Wisconsin, by the way. But Grant Ashawn kind of reminds me of maybe a comparable, maybe like Mason Salquist coming in last season. Has a little bit of that tenacity. Not the biggest guy in the world, but certainly I think Mason is maybe a little bit stockier than Grant is. But beyond that, I mean, sacrifice one thing for another. I think they'll be a really good fit. So I'm just nice to have a bottom six guy who is a little water bug, who you can maybe another thought too is like, remember when we were there in our first year when Yami Krannila was a freshman, which is a scary phrase to say because now he's a senior. Right? He was kind of that way where they put him on the third line and they just put him on the wing and he just kind of went. And he's not the biggest guy and definitely wasn't, when he was a freshman, but he was able to just kind of be that third forward high and establish a little bit more fleet of foot, a little bit more nimble play with two guys that could really bang some bodies,
And at times too, he was the F1, and this is what I like about Yami. Not to get too sidetracked, but there are times too, Noah, that he was the guy banging bodies too on that line. I mean, that's the thing is you have to commit to that identity of that line and to that forecheck. And regardless of where he was F1, 2, or 3, he could be kind of a utilitarian player in that role. But it wasn't afraid to, even though he was going up against guys that were on stature wise much bigger, he still went in, laid a little bit of physical contact. And at the end of the day, sometimes you just need to create a half-second delay, and then your line partners come in and maybe swoop up a loose puck.
And I certainly think he's going to be okay, Nick, because the other 7 people on this list are the shortest listed height for them is 6'1". Mm-hmm. So I think it'll be all right. As far as the rest of the true freshmen, number 17, Ethan Aucoin from Calgary, Alberta, 6'1", 170, the left-handed 2002, 36 goals, 27 apples, 63 points for Lloyd Minister in the AJHL, which was good for 5th in terms of league scoring, in terms of goals, and his total points were 15th in the league as well. And then really last year was kind of his first full season. I mean, you had the pandemic before, which really limited things up in Canada. Before that, played for Calgary in AAA, 29 goals in 38 games for him. So he's a guy that, again, offers that intrigue, as we talked about the AJHL, which has kind of become a plucking ground a little bit more, not only for college hockey, but especially for St. Cloud State and their willingness to go to some of these leagues here. I would say probably one of the more intriguing names on here as far as statistics compared to league, compared to translation to the NCHC level.
100%. There's a lot of expectations for this young kid, but I also feel like it's more dynamic in terms of where he could eventually translate, right? He could be that pure goal scorer, but then again, how does he make that transition? We've seen whether it's freshmen or transfers come in and they're in a different league, or they're coming from a different junior program and those same numbers don't translate, right? And I'm not predicting that. I'm certainly not making any sort of like downgrading Ethan Aucoin's talent, because clearly the talent's there for 5th in the league in scoring in the AJHL, which, as we've talked about in previous episodes, has become ripe in terms of producing not only talent for the NCHC, but for the NCAA as a whole. I mean, they've really become a breeding ground for a lot of NCAA scouts. So I think that he is going to be sort of like the bigger unknowns to watch, but I'll tell you what, if it does come together for him, watch out, because it does seem like he's got a rocket of a shot. He can place it where he wants, and he's got the skill and the speed to go with it.
Another curious one too. We don't talk about the MJHL a fair amount. The Steinbach Pistons, of course, are there.
Jack Rogers, yep.
Yeah, I have a couple friends who played for Steinbach as well, and also the Elmira Junior Enforcers, the USPHL, which is another league that is an interesting selection for trying to evaluate player talent here. So this is the most intriguing from a raw perspective, raw talent type piece. Jack Rogers, like you mentioned, East Northport, New York, 6'1", 190, right-handed, 2002, had 18 goals, 29 assists, 47 points in 39 games for Elmira, and then 67 points in 54 games with Steinbach to go along with 30 goals during that time. And then in 18 playoff games, he had 4 points and 9 assists, 4 goals, and 9 assists for 13 points for the Pistons. So he is someone who, again, obviously the MJ a little bit more well known as far as looking at, college talent. The USPHL is a smorgasbord of players, to say the least. There's some guys that have come out of there, but it's an interesting dynamic to kind of try to describe to people.
I actually have a little bit to say on that too. Yeah. So when I was out in Allentown, I sat next to Russ Cohen. For those who don't know, he's aka Sportsology on Twitter. He's actually essentially a scout. He does more of the broadcasting. He is on NHL Sirius XM radio, and his primary big thing is he likes to scout the individuals. He's a good talent identifier. And we were going through just even the players that were watching these. It was Michigan and AIC, then of course St. Cloud and Quinnipiac when we were out there. Had the chance to talk to him for multiple hours. Just a wonderful hockey brain to pick if you ever met one that really gets down to the individual skill set. But one thing he did say about the MJHL was, like you mentioned, that the overall league in terms of where you rank it, not very high. So what his curiosity take was, if you have a guy with, say, Jack Rogers, and again, I'm not trying to diminish Jack Rogers with anything, but he's the level of competition, the parity is just not quite there. So as you mentioned, this, besides Ethan Aucoin, I think Ethan Aucoin would be, higher on the list in terms of expectations for Huskies fandom. But right. Jack Rogers could be one that really could be the most curious case, because again, you don't score these kind of points by accident, but you do wonder if the lack of parity in the league and, maybe some of these, apparently from what Russ tells me, the MJHL, there's a lot of blowouts. There's just a lot of a team that you play where you have your couple high-end teams and everything else is steps below. Right. So you're kind of, his question was how seasoned is Jack to play good competition night in and night out, and that might affect his development or maybe his translation to NCAA Division I.
And that's where, you trust on the scouting process. You trust Brett Larson. Right. You trust at the time, which would be Nick Oliver. And then, of course, Dave Shayak, as well as, RJ Anga and, guys that are looking at this to give you kind of more of that judgment. Is he a guy that, maybe similar to Ryan Rosborough, maybe, just kind of gets acclimated to the Division I game, and then you see how he transitions from there? Or is he going to jump right in, and develop a lot quicker than we expect? He's a big question mark that we just don't know, mostly because, we haven't seen him play. Right. I haven't gotten to see any footage. So, but again, 6'1", 190, that's a Division I build. Yes, that's a big kid. So if you can get the skill set and the hockey IQ to ramp itself up, and we talked with Jack Peart when he came on the show last year about it, and he was talking about how the biggest thing is getting acclimated, getting used to the speed, especially, on the defensive side. Of course, Jack is a forward, but Jack Rogers, I should say, not Jack Peart. But he talked about Jack Peart did on the defensive side, and how you have to be able to slow your brain down for that extra second or two to make the play that you need to be able to make. So it'll be interesting, but certainly having some size certainly helps. Number 34, Adam Ingram, a forward from West St. Paul, Manitoba. 6'1", 175, the left-handed, 2003, was with the Youngstown Phantoms in the USHL last season, had 55 points. Whew. Yeah, plus 10 mark. Of course, they went to the playoffs as well. 26 goals, was good for 18th in the league, and 24th best points in the USHL last season. 16th in the league in 8 power play goals and 16 power play assists, which was tied for 17th in the league. So all top 25 numbers among the USHL rankings in those respective categories. Nashville 3rd overall selection at 82 in this past summer's draft. And he was the 69th Husky to be selected since the NHL draft started in 1986. So certainly the most easy to evaluate based on what we know about the USHL in terms of,
Development.
what we could say on paper. Yep. Maybe the more highly touted guy because of that reason. If you're a Huskies fan and you want to buy into that, because obviously everybody's got to earn it. What are the positives here that makes him a potential mainstay in the lineup right out of the gate?
Well, first of all, a size that's big, and then again, you don't get picked in the third round unless you really do feel like someone is not only you can't say a complete player, but it's got maybe multiple boxes checked that say he's a complete player and is maybe just missing one or two things. Like I said, this kid has a natural release. Again, he's a gifted goal scorer. We can see that. And at the USHL level, again, for folks who maybe aren't as akin to hockey junior leagues, this is the best junior league in the US. And when you're the top 20, essentially top 15 in scoring, that's no small feat by any stretch of the imagination. So he's again, I think he's going to be the guy that and one of the big question marks that Huskies the team faces is how do you replace a lot of the offense that you lost? This could be the answer, at least one of them. That I do think that as far as a freshman coming in terms of probably for a few years, it certainly sounds like Adam Ingram is probably the most complete forward that they've had in probably, dare we say, Brett Larson's recruiting era. Yeah, I think that's accurate. I would pen it as
completeness for sure. I think the best freshman performance that maybe we've seen in the Brett Larson era was probably Wcha Rivalries 2 years ago. But we've talked a little bit about the deficiencies in his game. So as far as someone who maybe becomes a little bit more well-rounded, we'll have to see. One would hope so. That'd be amazing.
Right. And granted, Wcha is 6th round pick of Toronto. And again, even when we watched him play his freshman year, we had concerns about, just some, like you mentioned, the more of just like the board battles, what's to say it, his physicality and his, dare I say, engagement into the physical side of the game. I think clearly, and I don't know if it's just maybe the type of player that he was, it almost seems like he shied away from that. And it's not that we're the ones to say this, but it definitely I think it definitely hurt his game because you could certainly see when teams defended him last year, they were really closing the gap on him. They really were trying to make him play essentially along the wall. They didn't want him to have this open ice anywhere. And for Wcha, again, if you want him to get back to having that scoring touch, I think that's an area of his game that's got to develop. And from everything we know, Adam Ingram already has that in his game. And so, you could be, dare I say, he's got the potential to have a better freshman output than Wcha had 2 years ago.
Should be interesting. The last forward on this list is our redshirt freshman, the 2000 Mountain Bridges, Ontario native, 6'3", 190. Ryan Rosborough on the forward side, of course, really didn't get an actual
He got close.
Yeah, he was supposed to.
He got close.
He was supposed to, and then he never did. But the Markham Royals in the OJHL for a couple of years, and then the Boston Junior Bruins in the NCDC before last season, as well as the South Shore Kings. Had 29 points in 37 games the season prior with the Bruins and Kings, and then had 23 goals and 45 assists in 109 games for the Royals in those couple of years prior. So, Nick, we talked about him a little bit last year. He's a centerman, big body, someone who is certainly learning to develop. Brett Larson, from the conversations we've had, sounds a little high on him as far as what he believes he can translate. And, again, great size, 6'3", 190.
Especially for down the middle.
Again, I think it's just that translation of skill and being able to crack the lineup here. We got, like I said, we got an inkling of who he might be as a player. What do you moreover think the conversation was from Brett Larson, Dave Shayak over the summer for him? Because again, not to say he can't get bigger, stronger, faster, but again, pretty good build already. What do you tell someone who maybe hasn't really had a chance to really crack that lineup, and it more goes down to the skill set, the hockey IQ, all those little things that, are going to get you to that next level in the lineup?
I think for Ryan, there was a couple of things that, almost got him in the lineup, and it was just some hockey IQ things from the bottom six. It was also the face-off dots were not great for St. Cloud last year. But also one big thing for Ryan is when we've seen him in practice, not the most fleet of foot. And again, you talk about the speed. I mean, we mentioned Jack Peart, right? It's so easy for us as fans, and even us in the media side, when we watch it from the broadcast angle, it looks fast, but then you get an ice level. Holy cow. it's a different animal. I truly wish that, there was a way. Oh, that's right. ESPN did that like board camera a couple a while back, was on like the ice cam, just to show you truly how fast this is going. And it's to the hockey IQ, right? Which is, you have to make your decisions quicker, which means your eyes have to be up. And for Ryan Roswell, just seemed to be like a couple of those pieces were missing. I think the coach's omen, right, Noah, is that put me in a position where if I put you in lineup, that I can't take you out of the lineup. That's really what it comes down to for Ryan. Again, it felt like he was close, but never really had the push needed to take somebody else out of the lineup. Right. I think he'll get a better chance this season. Again, there's a lot of freshmen in this group, granted with all the upperclassmen here, so he'll have a chance to earn his spot. But again, you have to be able to earn it and keep that spot away from somebody else. Hopefully with Brett Larson, we know that this is how he rolls his practices, that he's going to create it as a competition for everybody, and we'll have to see how he does. But again, that position he plays is super important for this year's group. The depth down the middle, we'll talk about that shortly, I would imagine. But so he's got every opportunity to do it. The question is, has he worked and gotten some of those key areas that Brett Larson wanted him better to be able to earn himself a position on the lineup here in the next couple of weeks?
Should be interesting. We'll have to see, as we've got 3 players left here, 2 defensemen and a netminder. Let's pair the defensemen together because, hey, they were teammates last season, Nick.
How about that?
2 seasons with the Waterloo Blackhawks for Cooper Wiley on defense. Stillwater, Minnesota native, 6'1", 190, a left-handed shot, the 2001. 8 goals, 37 assists for 45 points in 99 games as a defenseman in the USHL. Not too shabby. 6 goals and 21 assists for 27 points this past season. Of course, played for Stillwater for 3 years, 17 goals, 42 assists, 59 points in 71 games. And I was wondering, I'm very curious. I was like, is he related to former St. Cloud State women's defenseman Kenzie Wiley, who of course was a captain? I don't think they're related, but I will say Kenzie Wiley is from Ham Lake, Minnesota, which is like a 44-minute drive from Stillwater. So not to say they couldn't be related in some capacity, but I did not find anything. They don't look even remotely similar. So maybe just the same last name, but you never know. On the other side, Mason Raniers, the Edina, Minnesota, 6'1", 195, right-handed, 2001. Nick, you look at his profile photo. Mm-hmm. And I gotta be honest, he looks so much like an Edina kid for the one simple fact that you can tell he's really good at hockey. He spent 4 seasons with the Waterloo Blackhawks of the USHL, 42 points in 145 games. Past season, had 4 goals, 10 assists, 14 points, and led the team to the playoffs. Before that, 3 seasons with the Hornets, 2019 AA state title, and 3rd place in 2018. So this defensive core profile pictures are otherwise good-looking guy. I mean, you got to give that to him. Certainly looks sharp in the suit for sure. Are you pulling up the photo right now just to see?
No, I remember seeing. I remember seeing that one. That was pretty good. So.
What did you think I was gonna say, Nick?
You know what? Some days I just. What you prepare for is just not what ends up coming out of your mouth. So I just have to prepare for everything, honestly.
So these 2 guys in the backhand certainly do know how to play hockey here. Teammates as well, which certainly helps. Maybe they're a defensive pairing in the future. One of the things that's interesting about this team, by the way, side note, 9 defensemen, one more than what you normally would see carrying. It's actually probably better to be a forward than a defenseman this year if you're a St. Cloud Husky. How do these 2 guys give themselves a chance to crack the lineup here?
Well, I think, if we saw this with a couple of defensemen last year, right? We saw it with Andre Treball being in and out of the lineup, Brendan Bushy also being in and out of the lineup. There's no question Brett Larson places a high standard on his defensive team. He knows that North-South hockey starts with a defenseman. You got to be able to move the puck, make smart decisions, use your feet, be in the right lanes, help clear in front of your own net. And also, if you can, I think if they're going to earn a spot in the lineup, how about this? Add a little bit of offense in the blue line. You take away Nick Perbix last season, not a lot as far as offense coming from the blue line. Right. I know that Lidke did a little bit.
Yeah, Spencer Meyer had the next most points with 18 last season.
So you talk about, I think if there's one really big difference from last season, meaning, well, I should say this, 2 seasons ago from the national championship run to this last season, the offensive production from the blue line really, really, really was hurting. And if you can have a guy like Ranier, who appears to have a pretty good offensive inkling, at least from his junior years, and then Cooper Wiley as well. And as you mentioned, and I think this is going to go underrated for a lot of hockey fans, but if you're a pairing that's played together for a while, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If you're Brett Larson, I mean, you're not going to switch them up, but dare I say, if they were a pairing there, you give them, I think you give them a look at least, and then if they can at least handle their own, go from there. They probably get paired with a senior if they make the squad, but there's a lot of competition in this blue line, and it's going to be a rough go because we'll say this: if you've got now 9 defensemen, if you've got a bad night, chances are that it's going to make the decision for Brett Larson a little bit easier to try to switch a guy in versus maybe in the past, because you've got that extra 2 defensemen that are going to be on the press box most nights.
Yeah, maybe in the extra ice session next week, maybe we'll talk a little bit about the depth chart for St. Cloud State. Maybe that might be kind of a fun little thing to talk about, as we'll be less than a week away from hockey at that particular point for the college hockey world. Last player to talk about, James Gray, the goaltender from Toronto, Ontario, in the 6 up there, 6'2", 190, regular catching netminder of 2002, OJHL goaltender of the year last season. Played for the North York Rangers. That's not the New York Rangers, the North York Rangers. Led the league in wins with 25, save percentage with a 931, and goals against with a 196 in 36 games. Was 2-2 with a 934 and a 191 in the playoffs as well. Before that, played for the U18 team that won the TELUS Cup, basically the Canadian National Championship. MVP that season after a 9.4 save percentage and a 168 goals against. So decent size, not the biggest goal in the world, but 6'2" is certainly no slouch in terms of literally and figuratively. He's a guy that, as we look at what Jackson Castro has brought to the table, Dominic Bassey is, a question mark here. Is he going to be true to form and continue to develop and incline? I don't know, man. Especially, like I said, Jackson Castro entering his senior season. I mean, maybe a backup right now, but I think if those numbers have any potential of translating, I mean, goaltending is a unique position where it doesn't really sometimes come down to statistics per se. It comes down to more the mental side of things. And can you physically track? How athletic are you? It's a much different mindset of evaluation here. I like the kid, and I don't know. I think he's going to push a lot harder in training camp and give some of these veteran guys a little bit more of a nudge than I think a lot of people might anticipate.
I think so. And again, those numbers, I mean, they're over a large sample size. That's not like it's 15 or 16 games. I mean, a sub 2 goals against and an over 9.2 save percentage. Those don't happen by accident over a course of a 30 plus game stretch, right? Now, granted, and this is where I have to play the adverssary. Was he the beneficiary of a good system in front of him? We've seen that with goaltenders too, right? Where I mean, heck, let's take Darcy Kemper. I've said this before, right? He didn't have to be a rock star, and in a perfect world, that's what you want your goaltenders to be, is to make the stops you need to and don't have to stand on your head, right? Unless you're UMD, and every goaltender you seem to find always stands on your head and extends your season enough to get you a couple national championships. Anyway, but I digress. Hey, it's a formula that works apparently. So, but
you don't say.
You don't say, but as you mentioned, for goaltending, it's a lot of it. It's not what you don't do, right? It's are you not overplaying the puck? Are you what you not giving the opposing team, meaning not giving them second and third chance opportunities? How good is your rebound control? Are you overplaying pucks? Are you a type of goaltender that likes to play the puck behind the net? And if you do, is it just a simple play where you're trying to mimic Martin Brodeur or Marc-Andre Fleury, and maybe there's you make it a little bit more entertaining than it maybe should be. So it's going to be interesting. And if you're St. Cloud fans, a great problem to have. If you got 3 capable goaltenders, we saw what can happen. Ask Western Michigan 2 years ago, what can happen when your goaltending depth isn't there, how it can derail your entire season if one goes down. If they push each other, again, goaltenders, they're a different breed of people. You're putting on pads to stop 90 to 100 mile an hour, vulcanized driver coming at you. No thanks. So, it's a tight knit, little community. And so no question, if they're that high a caliber, only the team benefits from that, because it means they're going to push each other to be better. They'll give each other those scouting notes. It's going to be beneficial for everybody. So if he does push, even better, because again, Jackson Castro in his senior year, Dominic Bassey in his junior year, James Gray's a freshman. So if anything, he's going to pick up and learn, let's just say he is on the depth chart as number 2 or number 3. great way to learn, way to get acclimated to Division I level. And hey, you never know, right? Maybe someone does go down and get injured and he's got to get put into a game. Either way, those numbers look good, and I'm excited to see what he can do here with the Huskies.
And the thing last year too, and again, we've talked about it ad nauseum, so I don't think it's Jackson's fault per se, but the game against Quinnipiac maybe highlights the need we might start to see for the first time in the Brett Larson St. Cloud area, where we'll see a lot more rotation maybe between some goaltenders than we've seen in a couple of years previous. So should be interesting. The St. Cloud State Huskies coming off their 4th NCAA tournament appearance in the last 5 seasons, and 16th overall last season as well. Their schedule, and then we'll get to some fan questions here. You're going to get your money's worth. This is going to be a nice lengthy show for some St. Cloud hockey here. October 1st and 2nd versus St. Thomas, first game at the Xcel Energy Center in St. Paul before St. Cloud the previous year. So, or previous next game, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. October 14th and 15th, the Huskies actually have a week off before traveling to Wisconsin. Then at home against Mankato, October 21st and 22nd. And then the 28th and 29th, they are in Bemidji at the Sanford Center, and then at home that Saturday night. NCHC action starts off November 4th and 5th. Their first opponent, they are traveling to face the defending national champion Denver Pioneers.
Yikes.
Before coming back home to face the Western Michigan Broncos. 18th and 19th sees them travel to Ed Robeson Arena in Colorado College before December 2nd and 3rd versus North Dakota. So they do, of course, have that Thanksgiving weekend off. And then the 9th and 10th of December, pretty prototypical, heading to Miami before the Christmas break. Second half of the season, December 30th, they have an exhibition game opening up against Manitoba. North Dakota has them to open up the season. So there's your comparable there. And then, of course, they'll play the Fighting Hawks. The Huskies will in the early parts of December. January 7th and 8th, you were wondering about the old Wcha rivalries. Did it feel like one was missing? Well, here you go.
Yes, it was.
at home and then on the road, Friday, Saturday, the Minnesota Golden Gophers, January 7th and 8th. 13th and 14th at home against the Colorado College Tigers, and then at home again versus Denver. So a nice little stretch there for the Huskies, and then traveling up to Amsoil Arena in Duluth, January 27th and 28th. February 3rd and 4th, they're at home against Miami before traveling. Actually, they have a week off, and then they travel February 17th and 18th to Grand Forks, Ralph Finkelstedt Arena in North Dakota. Traveling to Omaha the following weekend, the only time they see the Mavericks on the docket this upcoming season. And then March 3rd and 4th, they are at home to close out the season against the Bulldogs. So everybody but the Mavericks and the Western Michigan Broncos, the Huskies will see twice next season. And then, of course, the quarterfinals, March 10th through the 12th, followed by the Frozen Face-Off March 17th and 18th. NCAA is the 23rd through the 25th, and then the Frozen Four in early April. So, Nick, let's get
from Tampa.
Yeah, Emily Arena. Let's get to some fan questions here. Why don't we? Let's start with Weldy at More Clappers, and this goes back to your Grant Cruikshank question. We have probably maybe 10 to 12 questions that might be linked here and there, so we'll see. Let's start with number 1. Is there a concern for the lack of depth at center? And I tweeted back, the Minnesota Wild have entered the chat.
The answer is short term is yes.
Yeah. But the question is, are guys like Grant Cruikshank, are guys like Ryan Rosborough, Mason Sahlquist, if he can find a way to play down the middle, do you think there will be a concern by the time we hit NCHC action time?
There could be. I mean, because here's the thing, right, is, the biggest thing with centers is not only your defensive responsibility, but also your face-offs. I mean, puck possession in today's game is crucial. And, thank goodness for a guy like Grant Cruikshank to come in and to provide just a little bit of veteran leadership in that particular aspect. But again, you still got Sahlquist as a sophomore who, by most center standards, is a bit undersized. Rosborough has got the size, but some other parts of his game still might be missing. So I do think there's a legitimate concern early on for the center depth, no question. But again, there's still a lot of unknowns. We haven't seen Ryan Roswell play a single bit. Grant Cruikshank, we know what he has been in different forms of what's he going to be like under Brett Larson and St. Cloud State. I still think like he's right at the moment, the top first line center. And then for some other guys, like we've seen Yami Karanila play center from time to time, right? Could he be, moved into a role where maybe he's the center? We don't know, but no question the loss of Nolan Walker is really, really going to hurt. He was really good in the face-off dot, really good at being the F3, not only on the offensive, but also defensively too, was really, really solid. So I do think that if there is one spot, the forward group that is one to watch, the center group is going to be the one that's going to have to build confidence and to build some cohesion early, or else that's going to be a rough ride for the Huskies.
So next question comes from Derek Johnson at Deeger4, and also asked by Johnny Mack and Derek Felska. Which freshman's going to surprise this year, Nick?
Ooh, which one's going to surprise? So when you say surprise, right, we're talking, some guy that maybe isn't projected to surprise. I think honestly the big name, and we said this before, but to me it's Ethan Aucoin. I really do feel like he has the skill set. I feel like that he's kind of been under the radar a little bit in terms of his skill set. Again, the AJHL becoming a plucking ground for higher end talent to go to the NCAAs. I do think that Ethan Aucoin is going to be that guy that surprises at least the bigger hockey world, rather than here, maybe in St. Cloud State land. But I think he's going to be the one that says, holy cow, who is this guy? And my goodness, is he's doing pretty well, don't you say?
Yeah, my take. How about we want a hot take? You want one?
When do I not want one?
Yeah.
This is the Huskies Warming House podcast. This is what we do.
All right. Well, I mean, it's no 7th Avenue pizza, but we'll give it our best shot here.
Are you going to say James Gray?
I am going to say James Gray, and I'm going to say that he gets an NCHC start this season.
Oh, you know what? It's possible.
I
think so.
I really think, and I'm not saying it's going to be against North Dakota, but I think maybe if Miami, for example, really struggles this season, I think he gets a look. I really do. I really do. So I think he's going to be the guy. I don't know. I obviously numbers speak for themselves, but goaltenders are just a different case. And I feel like he's someone that really has a chance to maybe make a jump quickly, especially with 2 veteran guys in front of him that are going to help him along in that respect. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I have a good feeling about it. I really do. And yeah, that sounded like hockey analytic wisdom, didn't it?
Yeah.
Derek Felska also wanted to know, even with Jack Peart back for his sophomore year, how much will the Huskies miss Elk River's Nick Perbix?
I have actually a hot take on this one. I don't think they're going to miss him as much. And here's why. It's not because you're missing Nick Perbix, but I think Josh Lidke proved, because Josh Lidke has a lot of the same tendencies in game that Nick Perbix did.
Yeah.
I think that he's only going to get better. He really, like you said, second half, my goodness, he became more of an appreciative player on the Huskies blue line. I do think he's going to earn top line minutes this year.
Yeah.
I'm going to go with that. So I think that while you're sad of Nick Perbix and him moving on into his professional career, obviously all the best to Nick Perbix and what a career he had for the St. Cloud State Huskies. I do think that Josh Lidke is going to pick up the proverbial work per se, and I don't think you're going to see as much of a drop back than maybe people expect. So surely you can't replace Nick Perbix, but you've got a pretty close comparable with Josh Lidke in his sophomore season. That's going to be here hopefully for the next couple of seasons. And like I said, he looked cool and comfortable in his freshman year. I only expect that to get better.
Yeah. And people always ask, what made Nick Perbix so good? And it really was the fact that he was a great first pass defenseman, but also really good at carrying the puck on his own, really good at recognizing when to jump up in the play, when not. Usually made a really good, smart decision. And as you talked about a lot with Brett Larson over the previous couple of years, his defensive game got really strong. The way that he's able to use his stick, the way that he's able to angle guys towards the boards, things like that. The other piece of this too, the other player mentioned was Jack Peart, and I know that, we've been talking about Josh Lidke and the growth that he has. Remember, Jack Peart's also only a sophomore and by no means had a bad season last year.
Sure.
I think maybe just didn't take the jump that we had expected. That's
hoped, maybe that's a better word.
Yeah, that's not to say that he can't come back in his sophomore season and find that poise and become one of those guys. Could you imagine if Josh Lidke and Jack Peart take off together this season, how dynamic of a duo that could be? So I'm still really high on Jack too. Again, freshman year is kind of an interesting piece where, again, we look at guys like, Yami Crandall a little bit. Zach Okabe is a really good example on the forward side. Took them a little bit to warm up and acclimate, but once they did, they were off and rolling and they haven't looked back. I think Jack was going to be another one of those guys. And I think that there is, for being a second round draft pick, for better or for worse, and being so Minnesota connected with all of that, where he's from, Minnesota
Mr. Hockey.
Wild. Yeah, exactly. It's easy not to say to let that pressure get to you, but there's that extra added piece of feeling like you want to perform at your best. I think he's going to be just fine. And I think he takes a huge jump. Someone asked, which freshman will surprise? I think the sophomore that's going to surprise this year is Jack Peart. I think that he's going to take a significant jump this season.
I agree. And just to quickly finish off that point, remember, he was on the World Junior roster. So, I mean, you earn a spot because of your ability. He's built, like a tank. You talk about Mike and Miller on the front end. Jack Pierre is a tank on the back end. And again, as you mentioned, I think just not necessarily the pressure per se, but just when you have all the Minnesota ties and the second round pick, I think, the bar for him was unrealistic to reach. I think everybody was expecting like almost him to be like a Vegas Golden Knights Stanley Cup final type talent, when probably a bit of an unfair bar for him to set anyway. And he still improved, right? There was a bit of some rough patches, but he was a true freshman. I mean, he's only 18 now, 19 years of age. So at the end of the day, Jack, still a young player, still has a lot of intangibles that you don't normally find in a defenseman of just around on the street. So I agree with you. I think he's going to make a big jump. What?
Go ahead. Around on the street. Yeah.
Well,
most people can't skate. Well, maybe in Minnesota they can, but
right. But to the point, as I terribly worded apparently to Noah Grant is,
Jack, your hockey skills are something you just don't find on the street. Oh,
no.
Okay.
Again, he's a complete package player. Again, I think he learned quite a bit. Not only throughout the season, but also then going back to World Juniors. He's getting the best competition. He's learning, he's growing, and I can't wait to see some of the adjustments and some of the things he might do differently in his sophomore season, because I agree with you. He'll make a big jump this season.
Well, talking about veteran street smarts, Derek also wants to know which transfer player will have the biggest impact this year. Can I say all of them?
Yeah, honestly.
You got a forward, a defenseman, and a goaltender. I think they're all going to make impacts in their respective pieces. I think Grant Cruikshank is the easy answer, just knowing his body of work. But honestly, I think all three of them are going to make a good adjustment there. Are we fair to say that?
I think we are, because we know with Brett Larson, he doesn't like to dip into the transfer portal, and when he does, there's for a specific purpose. And for Dominic Basie, he comes in to try to again create some competition amongst his goaltending crew after losing David Rennick, who had been their centerpiece for a couple of years. Anhorn is good depth at defenseman, and then
he's probably the one that I'm probably most excited to see, because we haven't seen Union play a lot,
right?
Yeah.
So I mean, and again, there's a reason why Brett has these guys in, so they'll make an impact for sure in their own unique and respective ways. And again, it's that puzzle piece that Brett Larson is trying to put together. And as we've seen in the past, more often than not with Brett Larson, a lot of those pieces he does take from the transfer portal end up fitting in pretty nicely. So I'm excited to see him play.
Yeah, speaking of fitting in and helping acclimate, like you mentioned, the captain, Spencer Meyer. Final question from Derek. Is Spencer Meyer the nicest player on the team? I would say off the ice, maybe. On the ice, no. Hopefully not, because...
Here's the thing. I know we know a lot of these guys. And one of the things that often, and as the media people, we don't talk about this enough. When you're around working with, Husky Productions, you're doing the pre-weekend interviews, which take usually on Tuesdays, maybe Wednesdays. Right. You get to kind of know these guys, not just as hockey players, but as people, right? Even going back to Kevin Fitzgerald, I mean, I'm just going to jump ship here. Not only was he the nicest guy, but he was the funniest dude in the freaking world. And I will say, I think I'm not trying to make this a blanket statement, but I do feel like that Huskies locker room, everybody is super cool, honestly. I don't think you can single somebody out. I do think that room is cohesive. I feel like everybody's in it for the team, not for themselves. And I really do feel like you can pick anybody in that locker room, have a normal human to human chat with them. And I think they're a very likable bunch, honestly.
Yeah, and I think one of the examples that maybe I would give is I remember going down, a couple years ago when we were there. I had to catch Brett Larson for something, and for whatever reason, the message that I had to talk to him didn't get relayed. So he was actually doing a video session. He was with 7 other players or whatever, and I popped in, and he was like, "Do you need me for something?" He was kind of annoyed because he was in the middle of his stuff, but took him 5 minutes to finish whatever he was doing. He came out, he was composed. He's like, "Hey, sorry about that. What do you need from me?" And I only need 5 minutes from you for this or whatever. And very personable and that sort of thing. So it's even in the moment, I think that locker room in general just has this common vibe of being accepting. and it's really kind of opened up to the media side. And I kind of wonder maybe a little bit too much now, because I think there's a lot of people that want to get a hand in figuring out what Huskies hockey is all about. So I'm, and not that we started or ended that by any means, but I think that,
Not even close.
Brett Larson and his ability to be accepting of people allowed us to have the idea to do what we started to do. And I think a lot of other people also want a part of that too. And that's exciting, because there's a lot of really good storylines there. The other piece too here.
Can I comment real quick on Spencer? Just because,
also very great interview for him on the Rink Live with Mick Hatton, talking about the incoming freshmen and things like that. So if you go check that out.
Yeah, very, very good. And for Spencer Meyer too, you talk about, him and his family. I'm working, trying to finish up a big masterpiece, a documentary on him and sort of some unique things of his upbringing. Well, let's put it that way. I try to tease it without giving it away. You talk about a genuine, nice human being that is an ultimate competitor on the ice, as you mentioned. But one of you talk about the reason why he's been a captain now for two.
Yeah, this will be his third season.
Third season, that's right. Yeah, third straight season. There's a reason for that. He rallies the troops. He knows when to say it, how to say it. And so for me, just a phenomenal human being. So for him specifically, very, very nice guy to direct it directly at Derek, I should say. Just an incredible human being on and off the ice for sure.
Well, let's tie the media and the defensive core together. Brian Moose, who's the KVSC voice of men's hockey, the play-by-play voice right now, also has the microphone next to his name on his Twitter handle. And why we didn't do that, I don't know why. And I'm kind of mad that we didn't, because he took it now. But
it's all good.
It's fine. What do you guys think of the defensive core this season? Personally, I am very excited to see what they can do. 9 bodies is a lot of opportunity for competition. It's
a lot. And, it is sort of, that's where Brett wants to have his strength, is on the blue line, right? And we see that with 9 defensemen. Dare I say, Noah, that when we've seen some great players, Jimmy Scholl, we've seen Jack Ashaw, just name a few. So at the end of it, I think what's different this year is if he's carrying those extra bodies, dare we say that there's going to be, I think, a very high standard held to the defensive core. And to Brian's point, does that mean that we might see more out of these? Maybe there's going to be a little bit more. And like I said, we need more offense from the blue line, a little bit more production than just from one person. So I do think you're going to see an emphasis on that. I do think with Cooper Wiley and Mason Reimers, guys that seem to have an offensive instinct from the blue line, to incorporate that maybe a little bit more in terms of the offensive scheme per se. If that holds true and they can, take care of business in their own end, dare I say that could be a big game changer for this Husky squad moving into this season.
Yeah. Only a couple more questions, probably about 5 or so. So we'll try to cruise through them here. Number 1, are we really out of Brodzinskis? And
yes, this
is from Johnny Mack. And I think I figured this out, Nick. CHSTRCPPRPT33 says fresh out of Brodzinski's, but the Ashawn's shelf is stacked again. And I think I finally figured it out, Nick, what the heck this meant, because his actual name was Chester. And I realized I think it's short for Chester Copperpot, who was a treasure hunter, an adventurer, an all-around brigand who was a real person. But according to the movie The Goonies, was the guy who went missing in the 1930s looking for One-Eyed Willie's treasure. And I think that's what his handle is. So I think I finally figured it out. It took me a hot minute, but I think I figured it out. So
probably we're out of week, but sure.
Yeah, all year. We are out of Brodzinski's. But the question is, do you see anyone making the jump and being the clear offensive leader? And is there any dark horse not on the top line right now? Which it's hard to say because I don't know who the top line is, but who do you think? Is there a clear offensive guy that you think is going to step out? I have a pair of them, but
I think you're going to see Crannell be part of that. I think Zach Okabe is going to be another part of that. And I also think Adam Ingram is going to be sort of the freshman that has, again, the most the biggest ability to join that group, as we talked about before in his accolades, a 3rd round pick again as the National Predators. That to me is going to be the names to watch in terms of offensive production. Can I add a twist to that?
Sure. I was about to add one too. We want to add one together?
Sure. Who goes first?
I think Vietti Miettinen is going to have a bounce back junior season.
Damn it, you beat it to me. Well, I'll even twist a little bit more. He needs it.
Yep.
He absolutely needs it because, again, with some of the players and, a little bit more completeness to their game, if he doesn't, it wouldn't surprise me if Wcha saw a reduced role. So
Yeah.
I think if anything, with Ethan Aucoin, Adam Ingram, and even say Jack Rogers, if he does project better in terms of maybe projects more of his numbers and maybe where he was playing, that leaves somebody on the odd man out. So I would think that it's imperative for VD to have one. And I would hope that some of the things that we talked about that are deficient in this game, he has worked on, because if he does, we know he has a release. That's the thing, is he has a good shot too. That was a big reason why he had such the freshman year that he did. Wasn't he NCHC freshman of the year? I'm pretty sure he was. 2 years ago. So if he doesn't, he's going to see a reduced role in the squad. And I think with Brett Larson carrying 90, you have a transfer goaltender, you have a freshman goaltender. You're seeing tidbits that suggest that maybe he's more willing to switch things up, on the fly or maybe game to game than maybe he hasn't in the past.
Good follow-up question here. What effect will the coaching change have with RJ Enga?
I don't know if you see much. Now, one thing, I sat next to RJ when they were in Mankato, and I'll tell you one thing, RJ has the sights of a hockey coach. He was an incredibly loud voice.
Well, that's good.
To Nick Oliver on the bench, right? I don't know if you change much. If anything, it's going to be just how do you communicate? Because again, he's going to be the receiver from Clark Custer. I really think that the biggest thing is Clark Custer is how do those two form a communication line? What does Clark Custer see? Because again, that video coach that sits up in the stands, it's got that bird's eye view. And then what sort of adjustments are the coaching staff's going to make based on what they see from not only on the bench, but also from up in the stands. And so to me, you're not going to see much of I don't know. I don't think it makes that much of a difference, but
so Clark Custer will be up with the magic conch up top, and they'll say, what defensive adjustments do we need to make? Nothing. I don't.
Right.
Should be interesting. Well, speaking of adjustments, 2 more questions left here, Nick, and then we'll head on to our extra ice session. Jason Bryant, who's the new public address voice, we'll talk about him in the extra ice session, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Best spot for me to grab a bite after a game when I head back to the cities. Gina Carlson says Blue Line South is my go-to for post-game stop when I'm headed back. And then, of course, go Huskies. Well, the best spot is MC's dugout. Just belly up and ask for the Hairy Buffalo, the perfect after-game snack, to which Caleb Peabody said, maybe a little dangerous for a drive back to the Twin Cities.
Very dangerous, actually.
So Nick and I actually kind of perused around a little bit. There was one place, what was it called? White Horse something or whatever that we there was an Italian place that was down there on the backside of whatever
it would have been where
downtown.
The press was, which I mean rep, but
but it was on the other side. Gosh, it was an Italian place. I'd have to look at the map again. Boulder Tap House.
Boulder Tap House
is always a good. Let me see if I could. Is there any others that you're thinking of? I want to see if I can.
Well, that I'm trying to remember that Irish place too. The Irish.
That's what I'm thinking of. Let me see if I can pull the map up here.
For you St. Cloud State older folks, it's where the old Rum Runners place used to be. I'm trying to remember the Irish pub names, but their food there was pretty good.
Yeah, pretty much anything kitty corner around that. Like
in the downtown area, in the historic downtown, you can't really go wrong.
Right. I mean, I know a lot of people go to the Pickled Loon. I never really had their food there, I guess. I mean, and more. Let's see if I can figure out.
You've been more quenching thirst when you're there than anything.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, there's the Chipotle, Brick and Bourbon, obviously.
Brick and Bourbon's fantastic. Yes, great people too.
7 West Tap House. Didn't we go to that one day?
I'm honest, Jude.
Yeah. Oh no. I'm on the other side here. Let's see here. Old Brick Tap House.
That's
Old Brick House. That's what it was. That was really good when we went one time there too. So yeah, I mean, you've got options really kind of around down. That 5th Avenue down near, MC's, where Cowboy Jack's is, those sorts of things. Certainly some interesting food items. I would say, like I said, I would recommend maybe Boulder Tap House for the simple fact that once you're done eating there, you can just jaunt the 2 miles over and jump back on.
Jump to 94.
Yep. And
But at the end of it, I like the local flavors, those, and even then you just hop down, County Road 75 and then link up with 94 there too. It's really not that bad of a drive.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, I like the better food. So, anything in historic downtown, like I said, Brick and Bourbon, just to name,
the Brick House, whatever it was. That was really good. Yeah.
That was fantastic.
That backside strip where like Brick and Bourbon is. There's all of those restaurants, whatever, on the other side, and those were pretty good. And then we went to Whitehorse, and that was okay. A little bit expensive, but I thought it was all right. We went there with Drew Steele, who of course is one of the NHL voices down in Texas right now.
Corpus Christi, I believe.
Yep. So, by the way, we also didn't mention congratulations the other day. Speaking of all the USHL talk for why can't I think Dubuque and Blake Tyson, who of course has been a former guest on the show that we work with, getting ready to work with Dubuque in the USHL and as their play-by-play voice this season as well too. But final question, fan question here, Nick. Caleb wants to know that remember that time that everyone doubted the Huskies and they went on that magical run to the national championship game? Can we do that again? And if so, will Nick finally pay his debts and buy us dinner?
That's getting old, Caleb. Can you come up with something else?
Well, to be fair, I haven't had my meal yet.
I haven't either.
Well, speaking of things to chew on here, Nick, our final question. We don't really have a comparison for the Huskies, but we do have a regular one as always. St. Cloud, we picked him to finish fourth in the NCHC. Certainly a chance for a lot of flux here if everything goes right. What do the Huskies have to do to not only secure home ice, but maybe try to claim a Penrose?
Simplify, honestly. You have some freshmen. They're going to have to, again, have to adjust to NCAA Division I hockey. You're going to have to replace your offense with a lot of that talent coming in, and then just be sure defensively. I really do think that your defensive core and why you have 9 is you're expecting maybe some turbulence up front early in the season. So to me, you simplify. I think you got to work pucks down low and try to at least establish a little bit of that forecheck. I know with Brett Larson, when he's able to work the puck from the goal line and then use your defenseman to go low high, I see a lot of success in that. And then once you're freshmen, especially forward freshmen, try to get in the groove and maybe get adjusted. That's where you can really start to really put on the gas, get some rush attempts, really unlock some of the true talent potential as with these guys. But to me, you keep it simple early. You allow these guys to get acclimated, and then you go from success from there.
Certainly, I agree. Take what's given to you a little bit and, find a bit of that killer mentality that you had a couple of years ago too. And, feeling comfortable being down in 1-goal games and realizing that, it's okay if you're down 1-0. It's okay if you're down 2-1. Like, you're going to be okay. Just find a way to figure it out and try to find the next bounce a little bit. And certainly a little bit of puck luck plays into that. But, being the team that gets to 3 goals, I think that should be your goal. Are you getting to 3 goals every night and build from there?
That was the case against Duluth.
Yeah. Defensively, it might be an up and down slope, but, finding that offensive production, finding that groove, finding that identity line for each thing. Do you have a scoring line? Do you have a shutdown line that can win faceoffs? Similar to that 4th line we talked about a couple years ago with Will Hammer, right? And Jared Cockrell. So I think it's going to be exciting. And of course, wishing the St. Cloud Huskies the best of luck in everything they do in the NCHC this season. We can't wait to cover another season of Huskies hockey. With that being said, Nick, a very abbreviated extra ice session is yet to come for all the happenings at St. Cloud State. And welcome into the Extra Ice session. Nick Maxon joining myself, Noah Grant. Nick, we are almost done with the show. Listeners, thank you for sticking around with us as we approach the 2-hour mark. I don't know the last time that we've actually ever said that on the show. Maybe a Christmas special?
Maybe.
Yeah, we're getting up there on that one for sure. But just very abbreviated, 8-10 minutes that we're going to talk about all the latest St. Cloud State happenings here. Some things that you missed. Of course, today was the 17th of September. The Puck Drop Breakfast was today. And that, of course, a couple of years ago was my first ever introduction to Brett Larson and all the coaches at St. Cloud that have kind of started us all on this journey. So kind of a fun little event that you get to check out as well. The captains, like we had alluded to, were named a couple weeks ago. Graduate defenseman Spencer Meyer in his 3rd season wearing the C. Senior forward Yami Kranila, graduate forward Micah Miller, and graduate forward Aiden Spellacy, all wearing the assistant captain letters. And Nick, it's interesting because we talked about the prediction of NCHC previews, and we talked about Aiden Spellacy maybe didn't have the greatest senior season that he had anticipated, and we thought maybe he might not be back, that sort of thing, depending on the influx or whatever. And not to say that we caught flack for that or anything, but I think it's easy to say, oh, you wrote this guy off and now he's still on the team, that sort of thing. Didn't have great point production, but is certainly a glue guy, as you can clearly tell with wearing a letter in that locker room, which
100%.
is something that admittedly is a little bit harder for us to see versus if we were around the guys for a day or two or in that locker room, we probably pick up on it right away. But then again, being a glue guy doesn't always mean that you stay, because you still got to produce too. So first of all, I'd like your opinion on the captains, but then a guy like Aiden Spellacy, where maybe we weren't the highest on him, maybe being a returner. Same with a guy like Brendan Bushy, and now they're returning. How do you quantify that for a listener who is wondering the thought process of where we were at and that sort of thing? Because it doesn't mean that we have a negative take on them per se. It's just trying to evaluate what we see.
Well, that's just it. You have to understand that, from our role is, what's the overall impact for them on the team, right? So it's not that we're trying to, burn a player down by any stretch of the means, but we do want to analyze what their impact is overall to the team, right? So for Spellacy, right, coming in for us, no question, was a depth role, a role that is more defensive than is offensive. So again, we talked about this before, Noah. Sometimes, I know the key phrase, ad nauseum, right? Where that fourth line role, Will Hammer, Jared Cockrell, and gosh, I got to remember the other person.
Kyler Kupka, wasn't it?
Kyler Kupka, yes, thank you very much. So it's one of those deals where, speaking of which, where did Kyler Kupka go? I didn't see him on the roster.
Isn't he playing for St. Thomas?
That's right. I'm a goofball. Yeah. At the end of the day, they fit a perfect role. And although if you took them out and if you never saw them play and you looked at their statistics and you go, that's not that impressive. But then you actually watch them in the system that made them successful. They were one of the toughest lines to play against defensively.
I don't know why I said St. Thomas. Who am I thinking of? I'm not thinking of Kyler Kupka. Kyler Kupka was on the team. Sorry. Names for those who are wondering how the hell we just did that. The names really start to run together when we've been rotating them over and over for 4 seasons. Who are we thinking of that went to St.
That was Thomas Rocco, wasn't it?
No. Thomas Rocco was playing.
Zerbs.
Trevor Zins.
Trevor Zins, yes.
Yeah, sorry, Kyler Kupka. I was, because in my head I was like, Kyler Kupka, I thought had a good year last year.
He did.
For
whatever reason, I just didn't remember seeing him. I'm like, wait a minute.
Sorry, Kyler. We'll have a better year, Kyler. We're not going to forget you. Yeah,
I'm such an idiot.
Yeah, he's an upperclassman. I know that.
Yeah, but I mean, but to that point, right? It's not that they don't get all the praise because their numbers don't jump off the paper, but for those who know the game and for us that have played it at a higher level, for those who we can sit back and we say, all right, there's an appreciation for these guys, right? Aiden Spellacy, number one, as a transfer, right? There's some players when they come in and transfer to a program. We just talked about this Grant Cruikshank, right, earlier in the episode. Whereas sometimes you go to a Minnesota because you have a skill set, and granted, it's a two-way street, right? That means you want to go there, and also the coaching staff wants you there too. So you feel like there's a fit, right? And for whatever reason, just a lot of times reasons beyond anybody's control, it just never meshed. But you kind of wonder too if that's the case. Maybe they feel like with Spellacy, a year number 2, maybe he's more comfortable with the system, right? That's so hard sometimes, especially when you've been playing under the same system for a couple of years. You're so comfortable in it, then you have to switch things up, maybe switch your role. Maybe he was more of a goal scorer in his previous team, and now he's more of a shutdown role type forward, right? So all these factors come into play. And I really, truly think that, again, you get voted on a captain by the players, number one. So that means the players want you. They understand the value of him. And the coaching staff obviously sees the value in him. And I kind of feel like maybe that was, dare I say, like a learning curve year. And maybe this year he's got a bit more handle on maybe the system and some of the things and where he needs to be. I do think he's going to bounce back this year. I really do. And because if he does, shoring up that bottom 6 is so important for the Huskies, and he's going to be a big integral part of that. And no question that if both the team himself didn't feel like that marriage was good, he wouldn't be back. So I feel like both of them see that there's a potential for a comeback year. Otherwise, he wouldn't be in his position right now.
For those who were wondering, Kyler Kupka finished 9th in team scoring among forwards, 5 goals, 13 assists, 18 points in 37 contests. Half a point per game player, was plus 12 last season. He's going to be a senior this year. Sorry, Kyler.
That's crazy.
It just runs together so fast. The other thing that I will say, not that it's an excuse at all, we can talk hockey ad nauseum, and it's not often that our brains get fried from talking hockey for a long time. My brain is absolutely fried from doing all the NCHC previews for sure. So apologies, Kyler. Geez Louise. Like I said, have an even better year so that we never forget you. couple of things that we won't forget here. Only 3 more little quick topics here. New video boards and sound system up at the Herbrooks National Hockey Center, with a new public address voice to go along with it. Of course, grateful for Chuck Clausen's 32 years of service and dedication, wishing him the best. But veteran PA announcer Jason Bryant joins St. Cloud State with NCAA championship and Olympic experience. Actually follows us on a bunch of different platforms, so thank you for that as well. 30 years of experience, kind of pretty much started his own startup company back in the late 90s when he was still going to school, and has really earned that. Several high-level events in the wrestling world, that's kind of his big gig. 3 Olympic Games, 16 World Championships, and 48 college national championships behind the public address mic. So pretty good voice to be added, as well as a new TV voice on color analyst role too,
Gino.
Nick. Yeah,
Yes.
Gino Parrish. So new voices coming in, new video board, sound system. Before we get to our very last little topic that will tie that all together very quickly, what do you think of all the new faces?
I like Gino, as you I called the game with him back in 2019, the All-Star High School Prospects game down there in St. Paul. So he, first of all, I love his energy. He, again, former St. Cloud State player himself. And I think in his one appearance last year too, I think he showed that he's capable of doing it for a full season. I know that he had some freelance opportunities here and there. He knows the game. He knows how to communicate his knowledge in a concise and a really good way. And like I said, I think what people are going to like about Gino is he's going to have a little bit of that homerism to himself, which I think is good. But I think, like I said, I think he's been more polished since even I did a game with him. I think he's really worked on his craft, and dare I say, I think we have to stop here real quick, Noah, because I think we do have to give out an appreciation for Pat Micheletti. I really, really do, because he served St. Cloud State broadcast for a multitude of years, is a wonderful human being, both off the camera as well as on the camera. He's incredibly talented, incredibly knowledgeable about the game.
And the man was a gopher on top of that.
Right. So, it's at the end of it, it's a change. There's no question. And we do wish Pat the best of luck. I know he's even last year, I know he was doing some stuff down with the Iowa Wild as a radio analyst. I know he's been jumping back and forth, and, whenever you take one full-time gig and, dare I say, things move in a different direction. Again, I don't know the reasoning for everything that happened. But, I think it is, I owe Pat a lot too, because even off camera, it's a wonderful guy to talk to. We talked hockey before almost every single broadcast or the past couple of seasons, whether it was in radio or on the television side. He's a very approachable human being. Again, loves to talk the game of hockey. And no question, it's going to be different around the Husky Productions world without him. So, but with that being said, I do owe him thanks, but also excited to see what Gino brings to the broadcast. A little bit different voice, but I think it'll be great.
Yeah, what is the opposite of a Wavo babies? The Wavo veterans? I have no idea. But wishing
the wave of geriatrics, maybe
the nursing home specials.
The wave of Knicks, I guess, if you're going for Caleb. Jeez.
I just remember your glasses and make sure the lights are on. But obviously wishing Pat the best of luck. Obviously a lot of adversity in his personal life too that he's really shined through as well too. So speaking of shiny new things, if you're talking about all things TV related, the TV schedule has been finalized as well too. You can find that on the Huskies website. And if you want to see public address announcers, new video board, sound system, well, the season starts October 1st and 2nd, obviously. But the Red and Black scrimmage is on September 25th, next Sunday at 7:30 p.m. Central Time. It is free to the public. The team will split into 2 groups and participate in a controlled scrimmage for 3 10-minute periods. The first 2 will be 5-on-5 action, and the final period is power play and penalty kill work. So if you want to get a chance to take a look at the Huskies as they ramp up into their final week before play, it should be exciting. Nick, I think I speak for you when I say that we need to get the heck out of here. That was a long episode.
It was.
Thank you so much for all of us who listened to us. Of course, had to give our Huskies some time and props, though, obviously. Very excited for this team. Hopefully continuing trending in the right direction. I'm really excited about this mix in this team this year. So Wild preseason getting underway on that same Sunday on the 25th. We will record our show likely on that day and release either later that day or on Monday. A Minnesota Wild preview, potential St. Cloud lineup card look for the extra ice session. Haven't confirmed that yet, but we'll look. St. Cloud State women's hockey gets underway the 24th and 25th. I believe St. Thomas there. I think they added an extra game on the 24th, and then men's hockey regular season action starts October 1st. So with that being said, Nick, for episode number 129, for Nick Maxon, I'm Noah Grant, and we will see you soon in the den.
Here, one-timer, come in, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Pervix!
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill the Thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL, a game winner!
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.